Chapter 867. Winter City. One of the cities furthest from the Yin to the Qin. A secret letter was sent here from the border of the Qin. In a hastily built palace, the Yin emperor, who had opened the secret letter, cried in the empty hall. This secret letter recorded all of Ji Dan's words before his death. Ji Dan's wish before his death could not be realized. His head would be sent to Chongling and presented to Yuanwu. The order to kill Ji Dan for peace had been given by the Yin emperor. But when he gave the order, this once powerful emperor's mind had been destroyed by his own order. He was in torment day and night. When he received the news of Ji Dan's death, his emotions completely lost control. Of all his sons and subjects, Ji Dan had been the one he loved the most. As he cried, this emperor hoped that Ji Dan's spirit in the heavens could forgive him. Clearly, the Qin army did not care about the Qi dynasty and wanted to destroy the Yin first. This war for the Yin dynasty needed too much time to buffer. Even if they had to pay a painful and humiliating price in this period of time, even if the Yin dynasty showed submission, maybe when the war between the Bazinkindo ground and Yuanwu started, the result would be different. In these days, when the news came that Zheng Xiu had fallen into the hands of the Bazinkindo ground, he had thought that the Bazinkindo ground would win this war with Yuanwu in the end. But in his torment, he had not thought about whether he and the Yin dynasty could obtain the forgiveness of the Bazinkindo ground. What he was thinking now was, no matter what, it was better than being destroyed by Yuanwu. I know I was wrong. I have already paid the price of my most beloved son. In the future, the Yin dynasty will give whatever you want from the Bazinkindo ground. Even as he cried, such a voice sounded in his mind. But this was just his own thought. A person's own thoughts were called wishful thinking. Even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. You're not even a cat crying for a mouse. A disdainful voice sounded in this hall that should have had no one but him. The crying stopped abruptly. The emperor of Yan's body trembled slightly. He saw in disbelief that a young girl in indigo robes was floating down from the shadows of the eaves and looking at him disdainfully. Just how scared are you of death? The girl looked at him with disdain. She spoke as if she was not in the Yin emperor's palace, but on the road outside. Your army is still entangled with the Qin army at the border, and you have already escaped to the other side of the Yin territory. If the Qin army continues to advance, will you not escape to the outside of the Yin territory and give yourself to the barbarian tribes? If you knew this would happen, why didn't you marry these barbarian tribes earlier? Why didn't you just marry a barbarian woman as your empress? Who are you? The Yin emperor finally came to his senses and shouted. The girl in green still had a look of disdain on her face. She simply said, Jing Liuli, that genius of Min Mountain Sword sect? The emperor of Yin stilled. His mind was still dizzy. While the name of the top genius of Min Mountain Sword sect and the matter of killing Li Si made this name familiar, such a Chongling cultivator was very distant to him, especially when she suddenly appeared in front of him. It was too unreal. I have come to kill you. Jing Liuli seemed to find it too troublesome and said directly, Kill me? At this time, the emperor of Yan's mind was not clear. He did not immediately ask why Jing Liuli wanted to kill him or seek a solution. He instinctively asked, I have already agreed to Yuanwu's terms. Shouldn't the Qin keep their word and retreat? How can you come to kill me? Such an answer was not at all like the words of an emperor who had been sitting on the throne for a long time. It was clearly like the words of a young and frightened cultivator who had just stepped out of the world. Are you scared out of your wits, or are you an idiot to begin with? Jing Liuli could not help but sneer. Do you want to cry again? When has Yuanwu ever kept his word? He signed an agreement with you at the Deer Mountain Conference. But how long has it been since he attacked the Chu? Also, even if he really retreats, what does it have to do with me? I did not come to kill you on his orders. Is it the Bazinkindo ground? The emperor of Yan's face paled immediately. It has nothing to do with the Bazinkindo ground. Jing Liuli shook her head. I want to kill you because I want to kill you. Also, after killing you, the Yin dynasty will fall into chaos faster. The emperor of Yin was speechless. He looked at this calm and confident young girl and could not understand what benefit this would bring her. His dazed expression caused Jing Liuli's disdain to grow. Such an idiot. Do you think everyone is like you? She looked at this emperor who had lost all of his light and said coolly. At this time, the Emperor of Yin finally realized what was about to happen. He said in a trembling voice, "How did you come in? Even if you can kill me, can you leave?" Jing Liuli frowned. "You have been scared out of your wits by Yuan Wu, so you did not realize that the cultivators who are truly useful have been sent by you to watch the generals you feel will rebel because of your orders. In your palace, there are only some trash like you left." She had lost patience with this emperor who had completely lost his mind and was very irritated. So after saying this, she did not want to say another word. A proud and aloof sword essence erupted from her body as she raised an eyebrow. The Emperor of Yan's heart palpitated. He instinctively shouted and retreated with astounding speed. He was a powerful cultivator, but he had no desire to fight and only wanted to escape. Jing Liuli just narrowed her eyes slightly. Her gaze was full of disdain. She did not truly attack. A rouge-red sword light appeared behind the Emperor of Yin like a poisonous snake silently coming out of its hole. When the Emperor of Yin sensed it, he could not stop himself and crashed into this sword light. This sword light was extremely sinister and stable. It pierced through the back of the Emperor of Yan's head and came out between his eyebrows. In this moment, when a dot of red came out between the Emperor of Yan's eyebrows, he was dead. Li Si's strongest assassin, Mu Hongyan, appeared after the sword light. She put away her sword and bowed slightly to Jing Liuli. Killing an emperor was no different to killing an ordinary cultivator for her. But for her and Li Si, killing a person like this was more important than killing millions of people. Chapter 868. A drop of blood dripped from Mu Hongyan's sword. The drop of blood on the ground was soft, but clear in her and Jing Liuli's ears. "Is it because you are nervous? Or do you think this person is more important?" Jing Liuli looked at the drop of blood on the ground and asked coolly. Even though the Yin dynasty cultivators who had been lured away outside the hall could return at any time, she did not seem to plan on leaving immediately. After leaving the Qin together for so many days, she had become familiar with this powerful female assassin next to Li Si. In the past, Mu Hongyan would not waste any power when she attacked. She would only calmly kill and harvest lives. As long as she was sure the other was dead, and not to vent her anger, she did not need to consider if the other had died well or miserably. The energy she saved for an assassin would be used for the following escape. In Jing Liuli's view, Mu Hongyan's attack that killed the Yin Emperor was too casual, too strong, and not her usual style. "Your cultivation has advanced quickly in these days. Or maybe I do not understand you well enough. Your cultivation has always advanced so quickly in the past, but I slowly understand the reason." Mu Hongyan expressionlessly put away her sword and shook her head. "You follow your own thoughts and feelings. You do not even care what the cultivation records say. You do what you feel is right. Even the flow of vital energy is what you feel is right. You do what you want and do not care what the records say. Looking at your cultivation, I've always been suspicious. If you don't follow the ancient records of your cultivation and the experiences of your seniors, aren't you afraid of going mad? Are you not afraid that it will have an adverse effect on the 5 qis in your body and affect the functions of your internal organs? But the facts prove that you are right." Looking at the calm Jing Liuli, Mu Hongyan could not help but shake her head again. Later I understood, cultivation is like learning to read and learn. Each person's body is different. There is nothing wrong with the experiences of those seniors, but that is what they feel in their cultivation. As for your intuition, it is what your body and your cultivation needs. If you follow the records and the experiences of your seniors, I fear you will take many detours. And then, Jing Liuli looked at her and asked, "I didn't deliberately control the strength of this sword. Perhaps according to my usual sword style, the strength of this sword was a little too strong." Mu Hongyan didn't feel that it was boring to talk about the difference in strength in this dangerous place. Instead, she said seriously, "However, after stabbing out with my sword, I felt that I used less strength than usual. Instead, I save a lot of energy. It turns out that I used to spend more energy on carefully controlling my own body. Controlling one's flesh and blood and exerting less force will instead consume a lot of energy. The same goes for one's mind. A strange expression appeared on Mu Hongyin's face. Before Prime Minister Li Si died, he said that if we wanted to know his story, we should go to Chongling's 3-scholar tree hall. But when we left Chongling, we went there. It was a very ordinary place. He had lived there for a while when he was young and planted 3-scholar trees. Other than that, there was nothing else. We asked everyone back then and searched every corner, but did not find anything special. When I left Chongling, I did not understand. But after coming here with you, I finally understood. In the view of the Qin, the scholar tree was like a ghost. Planting it in the yard was inauspicious, but he did not care. Maybe later, he rebelled against the Li family and destroyed them for no special reason. He wanted to do so and felt that it was right, so he did it, just like you now. As a Qin person, you feel that it is right for the Qin to destroy the other dynasties. You want to do it, so you do it. So Prime Minister Li Si's cultivation talent was average, but he was able to become one of the strongest cultivators in Chongling. You are very talented, and your cultivation speed is even faster. And then, Jing Lioli looked in her eyes and seemed to see through her thoughts. What else do you want to do? Do you want to kill the Qi Emperor as well? Mu Hongyin suddenly laughed. Her smile was also very rare. After you understand some things, you will find it meaningless to do them again. If it is meaningless, you will not want to do it. If you do not want to do it, you will not do it. It is about time. She turned to look at the door of the hall and said. He didn't know if she meant that it was about time to leave or if there was a deeper meaning behind her words. Then we will part here? Jing Lioli saw her thoughts at this time and could not help but feel curious. Other than assassins, which you are tired of, what do you want to do the most right now? I want to travel with nothing to do. I also want to teach people to cultivate. If I see some pitiful girls or boys like me when I was young, I will teach them all of my cultivation methods. I will not care about their talent or what kind of people they can become in the future. Mu Hongyin faintly smiled. I don't want to participate in the struggles of peak cultivators like you. The endless possibilities of these minor characters might still be interesting to me many years from now. There will be many interesting things that will happen for me to hear. Interesting? Jing Lioli's eyebrows rose as he praised sincerely. Almost all the cultivation sects were afraid that their opponents would know their secrets. Their cultivation methods were kept secret, and their secret manuals were never given to outsiders. This female assassin rarely had a match among Realm 7s. Her cultivation methods were naturally much more powerful than those of ordinary sections. If she did not cherish such methods and taught people everywhere, many interesting things may happen in the future. This is good. When Mu Hongyin's figure disappeared from the hall, Jing Lioli said to himself, those who watch are spectators. Those who leave. The fewer people I can influence in the end, the simpler things will be. She really does not walk the normal path. Walking in an exceptionally luxurious carriage in the Yin territory, Xie Changsheng, who had received a secret message from Winifel, sneered and made such a comment. Then he looked directly at Wu Guang sitting across from him and threw the secret message over. The more chaotic a place is, the more business can be done. It was already chaotic enough, and now it will be even more chaotic. Jing Lioli actually assassinated the Emperor of Yin. Wu Guang was not like Xie Changsheng, who seemed to be witnessing the death of a passerby. His breathing paused slightly, and his fingers trembled in shock. Killing Ji Dan is madness. Yin is not far from destruction. Now, she has been killed. Yin is about to be destroyed, and she will not be able to last much longer. Xie Changsheng still had an unconcerned expression. He flicked his forehead thoughtfully and said to himself, and then, the Qin destroyed the Yin and Qi and fulfilled Jing Lioli's wishes. Just like doing business, there is always a final goal. She is young. Of course there will be after. Wu Guang took a deep breath and calmed his shocked emotions. Will she really stand on Yuan Wu's side against Ding Ning? Normal people may think so, but I do not think so. Xie Changsheng laughed. It is not like she only knows now that she is not as good as Ding Ning. When she was learning from Ding Ning in Chongling, she felt that Ding Ning was much stronger than her. But at the time, she did not want to compete with Ding Ning. In my view, she did not have the thought of competing with Ding Ning. Wu Guang frowned. He did not argue, but he did not feel that Xie Changxing was right. At this time, any person's thoughts would change. And then? However, Xie Changxing was already knocking on the carriage window. For someone like her, what would she be most interested in doing in the end? Chapter 869. The hardest thing to predict was the human heart. The more extraordinary a person was, the more impossible it was to know their true thoughts. Lin Zhujiu was making wine. Celestial Wolf Mountain was one of the estuaries of Jiaodong Commandery. While the name was wild, it was the most beautiful seaside mountain in Jiaodong Commandery. This place was blessed by the heavens. There were 3 islands facing the southeast. One was Pan Turtle, one was Tianchong, and one was Dinghai. These 3 islands blocked the sea wind coming from Celestial Wolf Mountain, so there were no strong winds on Celestial Wolf Mountain all year round. Ever since the Zheng family took control of Jiaodong Commandery, many of the quiet courtyards on Celestial Wolf Mountain were taken over by the Zheng family, used for cultivation or rest. The small courtyard Lin Zhujiu was in was called the Star-Gazing Pavilion. It was the highest place on Celestial Wolf Mountain and could see the furthest. Close up, one could see the calm harbor of different colors under the sunlight and the vast sea in the distance. Even better, on starry nights, the stars in the sky were like a dream. Many galaxies that could not be seen anywhere else formed magnificent silver sand in the sky. Back then, everyone on the Bazinkindo ground loved to drink. The more they drank, the colder the water, the warmer the wine. But back then, in terms of love and tolerance, Lin Zhujiu was the best. You do not know, when Wang Jingming first came to Chongling, he did not like to drink. He felt that the strong wine was too strong, and the yellow wine was too smoky. What he liked to drink the most was the sweet rice wine. Lin Zhujiu had yellow wine on the stove in front of him. He looked at Zhangsun Qinxue sitting across from him and smiled as he talked about the past. Later, when he met us, I told him many times. He said he needed to be absolutely sober when using the sword. I said he needed to follow his heart and be free. Later, he felt this was reasonable, and his sword skills improved greatly. But he still did not like strong wine that burned his blade. He still liked light, mellow, and sweet. I remember that you did not touch wine back then, and did not even like to smell wine. I had not expected you to open a wine shop in Chongling, because I regretted it. Zhangsun Qinxue lifted the pot and poured a cup for Lin Zhuo and herself. The wine was like amber with some osmanthus that had just been sprinkled in. She smiled faintly. Originally, I hated him, but when I heard that he had died in battle in Chongling, I did not know what to feel. I thought that I could not let go of my status back then. I thought about it carefully and compared myself to Zheng Xiu. I felt that the greatest difference between us was that back then, she was able to blend in with you people. Drinking together, marching together, fighting together. In the end, I regretted it. I wanted to get drunk as much as I wanted. At least I had some memories, and it was better than being reserved. When I opened a wine shop in Falling Parasol and learned how to make wine from him, I could not help but fantasize that if I had been by his side instead of Zheng Xiu, maybe everything would have changed. My family would not have been destroyed, and he would not have died. Lin Zhuo drank the wine in one gulp and smiled, his smile filled with emotion. Who could have known that these things would happen later? You really do not want to see the present Zheng Xiu and hear what she has to say? He looked down, his gaze moving outside the window. In a large river that led to this end, a merchant ship was coming. That ship did not look any different from an ordinary Jiaodong Commandery ship, but both he and Zhangsun Qinxue knew that Zheng Xiu was on that ship. I had thought of mocking her to her face, but I did not think that I would get any pleasure. Instead, I would feel disgust when I see her. Zhangsun Qinxue shook her head. Lin Zhujiu looked at her and could not help but laugh. No matter how many years had passed, a person's temper and personality seemed to be hard to change. The destination of the merchant ship was Lin Shui Pavilion at the foot of Celestial Wolf Mountain. Ding Ning was in a pavilion closest to the wharf at Lin Shui Pavilion, watching the arrival of the merchant ship. Compared to the last meeting, This meeting with a predetermined ending stirred up old matters in many people's hearts. Very few people would truly believe in fate. But as the merchant ship approached the shore, Ding Ning could not help but think that this seemed to be the will of the heavens. Back in Chongling, he and Zheng Xiu had been a couple that everyone envied, but he had never traveled through Jiaodong Commandery with Zheng Xiu. Intentionally or unintentionally, he could not bear to look back and turn to the east. What is there that you cannot let go of? When Xin Xian sent Zheng Xiu into the pavilion and then left, Ding Ning looked at Zheng Xiu, who had changed into plain robes and covered her face to hide the scars on her face, and said, "This came from his heart." He wanted to say it to himself and Zheng Xiu at the same time. The gentle sea breeze blew at the white veil hanging from the pavilion. Zheng Xiu sat down in front of Ding Ning and did not respond. If you do not love, it is hard to hate. You do not truly love him. You only love yourself. Ding Ning's brow furrowed slightly. He looked at the other's face that was so unfamiliar to him, and his tone was as light as the sea breeze. If you want to fight him, we are happy to see it and even ask for it. But why do you want to do this? Back then, I chose you and not him because I was unwilling. I was unwilling to become an ordinary woman standing behind you and have children. Also, my cultivation experience in Jiaodong Commandery made me understand that if you do not act against others, others will act against you. If you want to survive, you have to kill those opponents that threaten you. Subconsciously, I am worried that if I stay with you, I will still be killed by others in the future. If I reach the peak, but return to being ordinary, what is the meaning of my life? Zheng Xiu's voice sounded hollow. Right now, I am also unwilling. In the past, I only wanted to reach my goal and put aside my personal likes and dislikes. But when I am unable to reach my goal, I find that I hate him. Disregarding the past, at least now, compared to you and him, I hate him more. Since I can't win in the battle with you, I don't want him to win in the battle between you and him. Ding Ning took a deep breath. He did not want to use words to evaluate her, because he had not cultivated in Jiaodong Commandery and could not put himself in her shoes. He did not qualify to judge Zheng Xiu, who had come out of Jiaodong Commandery back then. Zheng Xiu continued. Also, in these years, I thought you were definitely dead. I always had a thought if I really fought him to the death, who would win? I really want to try. If this is your last wish, I can help you complete it. Ding Ning looked up and did not look at her. You can tell me now what you can do and how I can help you. After a pause, Ding Ning said calmly, Also, I must guarantee that if nothing unexpected happens after you and him fight, regardless of whether he wins or you win, you must die and leave this world. Chapter 870. Is this preserving my last dignity? Zheng Xiu asked after a moment of silence. Ding Ning was also silent for a moment and said, You can think of it this way. This will probably be the last time we will meet in this world. Zheng Xiu looked at him calmly and said slowly, You do not want to say anything to me? Ding Ning shook his head and said with unusual calmness and simplicity, I do not want to. Regardless of whether you want to or not, I can tell you if there is another chance between you and Yuan Wu, I will choose you, Zheng Xiu said calmly. If there is another chance, I will not choose you. Ding Ning looked into her eyes and said seriously. The pavilion became completely silent. The strongest hatred would usually end in silence. They were not willing to say a word and were not willing to think about it. Everything was decided. Everything was meaningless. Zheng Xiu's gaze left Ding Ning's face and looked towards the vast sea. The light reflecting off the sea was blinding and caused her eyelids to twitch. She had once stood like this and looked at the surface of the sea. At that time, she thought that she had already suffered so much and walked so far. The endless sea in front of her was her journey. One day, her kingdom, her army, would conquer to the ends of the world she could not see. But now, she saw her own path back. It is very simple to complete my last wish. She closed her eyes. The true Jiaodong Commandery floating island is in your hands. There are many things you know the use of, but some you do not know the use of. I know a kind of pill recipe that can make the most poisonous poison in the world. Even Realm 8 cultivators cannot resist it. But this kind of poison can allow me to recover my cultivation for a while and even become stronger. In the ancient books of Jiaodong Commandery, this kind of medicine is called the final radiance of the setting sun, or returning home. Many years ago, it was prepared by fishermen who went out to sea. When they encountered a storm overseas, their ships capsized, and their strength was exhausted, they would take this poison. Many of them could support themselves to cross the sea, swim back to shore, and die after seeing their families and loved ones. Now, I have seen you for the last time. There are some words that I have said, whether you like to hear or not, whether you want to hear them or not. It all depends on whether you are willing to let Qing Yaoyin help me refine this pill. Ding Ning was silent for a while, then said, I will ask him to refine the medicinal properties more intensely. Zheng Xiu did not look at him, but said sincerely, Thank you. I didn't expect it to end so quickly. I didn't expect it to be so fast either. Not far from the pavilion, there was a gardener who was planting flowers on the beach. The scissors in his hand were very unique and exuded a unique aura. He was Zhang 15. Not far from him, a young lady in a white dress was nibbling on a sweet cake as if no one else was around. Looking at her satisfied and leisurely appearance, few would associate her with the awe-inspiring bureau chief Yi. Seeing this quickly end conversation, the two could not help but express their opinions. What would you do if it was you? Yi Sealing could not help but ask Zhang 15. Zhang 15 thought seriously. I fear that I will avoid meeting her. If she has something to say to me, I fear that I will have someone pass it on. I fear that my mind will be disrupted. Yi Sealing smiled and said, It seems that he is not afraid of his mind being disrupted. Zhang 15 also smiled. This is what Yuan Wu is most worried about. Strictly speaking, Yi Sealing and Zhang 15 were not close. The two were not cultivators of the same generation in Chongling back then. Zhang 15 had become famous in the Bazin Kendo ground back then, and Yi Sealing was a cultivator who had quickly grown after Wang Jingming's teaching. He was a junior. The two had not talked much in the past, but today, Yi Sealing felt that he was a suitable person to talk to. Zhang 15 did not speak much, but he was very honest. Do you feel that Zheng Xiu can win against Yuan Wu? She asked after finishing the cake in her hand. It is hard to say. Women are different when they go crazy. Zhang 15 looked at her and said, Also, it is harder to stop Yuan Wu from escaping than to kill him. Yuan Wu is realmate. If he is certain he cannot win and just wants to escape, it will be hard to keep him. For someone like him, if he were to lose his empire, who knew what he would do? He will become a big shot and assassinate our people. That is true trouble. He really is capable of doing anything. Thinking back to everything Yuan Wu had done, Yi Sealing nodded. Even if he loses in a fair fight, he may not care about his face. It is best if he has nothing to live for and feels that there is no meaning in escaping. In the end, Yi Sealing looked at the pavilion and added coldly, just like Zheng Xiu now. She asked for it. Zhang Shiwu also spoke his honest thoughts. When you have misfortune on you, you don't want to get rid of it completely. Instead, you feel sorry for yourself and think that this is fate. You want to continue this fate and even pass it on to others. This is the real misfortune. A soaring snake rose from a certain bay in Jiaodong Commandery and quickly turned into a black cloud in the sky. This black cloud floated in the air for a long time and was about to land by a wild river. But the serpent in the black cloud suddenly felt great terror, and the energy around it started to ripple violently. The black cloud scattered and formed a light rain that fell down. There were multiple wooden houses by the river. They could only be called clean, but not elegant. Wild grass and flowers grew freely. A young girl dressed in ordinary coarse clothes was looking at a vegetable field that did not look like anything. She was at a loss for what to do. Yantai Guanjian came with a drizzle. He was originally a descendant of a large family and had strict etiquette. But when he saw this young woman and that vegetable field that looked like it had been chewed on by a dog, he could not help but laugh. Who would have thought that Zhao Si of the Zhao Sword Furnace could not even manage a vegetable field, and the vegetables he grew were not as good-looking as wild vegetables? Zhao Si looked at this grandmaster of Min Mountain Sword sect, tidied his hair, and pointed at this vegetable field. "I will treat you to vegetable soup later." "It is my honor." Yantai Guanjian put away his smile and bowed. Zhao Si returned to the house to make tea and said, "Why have you come to find me this time?" "To borrow a sword." Yantai Guanjian recounted the meeting between Zheng Xiao and Ding Ning. "I just took my life bond sword from her, and now I have to lend it to her. This matter is slightly laughable, but very interesting." Zhao Si smiled faintly. "But since I am lending it to her to deal with Yuan Wu, I will do it to the extreme. Bring my life bond sword to my senior sect brother, and then bring my life bond sword to Zheng Xiao." Chapter 871. Tantai Guanjian drank the soup, and after expressing his thanks again, he took her life bond sword and left. Zhao Si looked at the vegetable field that was growing and dying on its own, and was at a loss of what to do. This kind of food was just as difficult as when he first started learning the sword. It looked like he could not follow his favorite tastes and eat more vegetables. For a long time in the future, if he wanted to be self-sufficient, he would have to be like many of the cultivators who had retreated to the mountains and forests, relying on hunting for meat. But it seemed that it was not impossible to hunt some meat and go to the nearby market to trade for some millet and vegetables. No one would have thought, especially the Qin, that the great rebel of the Zhao sword furnace, Zhao Si, whom they were most wary of, was thinking about the land in front of him. The Qin also would not have thought that the great rebel by Shan Shui, who had never had a fixed home since she started learning the sword, would settle down. Bai Shan Shui had experienced the glory of the Wei Cloud Water Palace. She was not as casual as Zhao Si. The place she thought she might live in had been carefully chosen. The place she chose to stay was by Lake Rong on Little Mu Mountain. This had once been the territory of the Wei dynasty, and now belonged to the Qin. There were a few ancient villages here that had never experienced any war. So while the houses were old, they were all well rested. Most valuable was that this village did not practice martial arts or cultivate. All of them were scholars, and outside they were all civil officials. The culture was scholarly. At the end of the village, on the slope, and by the lake, the naturally growing apricot trees and wild cherry trees were very old and had a special flavor. In these villages, there were descendants of former officials of the Wei dynasty. Naturally, they knew about Bai Shan Shui and helped her purchase a courtyard by the lake in the village. She rested there with all her heart, and it was exceptionally elegant. Even the wooden plank road on the lake and the mountain rocks and the lake grass beside the balcony were all ingenious and made people feel comfortable looking at them. A place that was too good would cause people to be lazy. Bai Shan Shui held a wine pot in one hand and reached outside the window, her cheek leaning against the window. The wine pot was an old gourd, so polished it was purple. A clean, pure gold ribbon hung straight down, wrapping around her white wrist. The end of the ribbon swayed along with her wrist in the crystal-clear lake water, creating ripples one after another. Ever since she came, some white carp in the lake, which she usually couldn't see, since the aura they liked. They often appeared outside her window and played in groups. Sometimes they would peck her fingers that she put into the lake like cute children, tickling her and making her laugh. In the room behind her, Li Yunrui was idly grinding incense powder and making incense by hand. Such lazy and contented times had passed for many days, until today he received some news from Jiaodong Commandery. Who would have thought that Zheng Xiao would do something like this? Whether she is vexed, regretful, or venting her own grievances, it is good that she is going to fight Yuan Wu. Bai Shan Shui was a little drunk. She raised her head and put down the wine pot. She rubbed her hot cheeks and said, "Shall we go to Swallow Winter? You have only been idle for a few days, and the room is not lively enough. The smell of smoke has not come out, and you can't stay idle?" Li Yunrui stilled and couldn't help but laugh at her. The Qin army has entered, and the Yin dynasty has been destroyed. It is chaotic enough. Do you think it is not chaotic enough and want to interfere? It is not that I cannot stay idle. Zheng Xiao is going to fight Yuan Wu, and I want to give something to Zheng Xiao. The Yin dynasty has a golden cicada and phoenix robe. It is a powerful seal weapon that the grandfather of the Yin emperor, whose reputation was ruined, made to curry favor with a concubine. Before I entered Chongling, I wanted to steal it to protect myself. But at the time, my cultivation was not enough, and I did not dare to take the risk. Now, the Yin Emperor has been assassinated. While winter has a fake king, it is just a group of people waiting to die. It is not hard to take it out. Bai Shanshui gave a rare childish smile. But as she raised an eyebrow, she had the aura of a giant. Everyone in the world wants to see this battle. I fear that I am not the only one with such thoughts. At this time, the world should be even more chaotic than when the Qin dynasty, Han, Zhao, and Wei had been fighting. No one had expected that the Yin Emperor, who had been very reasonable in the past, would order the execution of the Yin Crown Prince, Ji Dan, to seek peace. Maybe only an emperor like him, who had more and lost more, would be more panicked than ordinary people and lose their reason when they were in a constant state of panic. When the news of Ji Dan's death spread, the Yin army was already in chaos. Adding on that, the Yin Emperor had abandoned the capital and fled to the border city of Winter in an attempt to gain the support of the barbarian tribes outside, or flee outside, but he had been assassinated by Jing Liuli. At this time, while the Yin dynasty had elected a new king, they were powerless to reverse the situation. The Qin army marched straight in. Any Qin army of more than 10,000 could march as they wished in the Yin territory. They could not meet any Yin army that could stop them. Like a piece of land slowly burning, the Yin dynasty no longer existed. It was just in the process of dying. Without the lips, the teeth would be cold. The Qi dynasty was in chaos. Adding on the secret instigation of the Qin, bandits rose in the territory. The limited army of the Qi dynasty was exhausted from running. There was war everywhere. But in the world of cultivators that would decide the direction of this world, the great show seemed to be coming to an end. Many all-powerful people were doing very ordinary things. A youth was walking on the mountain path with a jar of warm medicinal soup. This was on a famed mountain by the sea of Jiaodong Commandery. The sea breeze was warm, and the weather was pleasant. He walked into a stone room. Inside the room was the Donghu monk who was used to living in the cold caves. When the Donghu monk started to drink the medicine, he sensed the changes in the Donghu monk's body. The Donghu monk looked at him with admiration. This youth was Li Shixing. His breakthrough was a rare opportunity and unimaginable joy for the Donghu monk. Li Shixing was not a medicine master, but after receiving the Donghu monk's inheritance, he could sense the changes in the Donghu monk's presence more clearly than Qin Yaoyin. In these days, Li Shixing had started to try to use his life bond energy with medicine to help the Donghu monk recover. The Donghu monk's wounds were recovering faster than he had imagined, or rather, he had more hope of recovery. Such ordinary days had already passed for many days. Today, the two had not had the chance to speak, but at this time, a powerful presence of life came from a nearby mountain, shocking both of them. This was a kind of life power that had revived and burned vigorously. It is Zheng Xiao. Elder Qin Yaoyin should have used medicine on her. Li Shixing immediately thought of what this presence was. He thought that he had forgotten to tell him about Zheng Xiao in the past 2 days, so he described it in detail. Such a powerful final burst of consciousness. The Donghu monk was amazed. Li Shixing was immediately worried. He looked at him and shook his head. Do not think of using this medicine. Your wounds have a chance of recovery. Also, you do not need to risk your life like this against Yuan Wu. The Donghu monk knew that he had misunderstood and laughed loudly. Everyone in the world should want to see this battle. He said the same thing as Bai Shanshui. Then he looked at Li Shixing and said, since she has used this tiger wolf medicine, I want to give her a method to stimulate her body's potential. Chapter 872. The present Yuan Wu is like Wang Jingming in the past. In Wuji, the Wuji people moved as the pastures and hunting grounds moved. The imperial family did the same, but their connection with the outside world grew closer in this period of time. In the tents scattered like pearls in the plains, the old woman with the highest power in Wuji looked at the latest letter from Jiaodong Commandery. She looked at the 2 attendants in the tent with unusual warmth and said slowly, back then, everyone in the world wanted Wang Jingming to die, but after Wang Jingming died once, the the world found that Yuanwu controls the Qin dynasty and is not as good as when Wang Jingming was alive. After so many years, the world has seen through Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu, so now everyone wants Yuanwu to die. Zheng Xiu is going to fight Yuanwu. Everyone in the world wants to see. People in high places always had the same view. She said the same thing. Many people will want to help Zheng Xiu, especially when Zheng Xiu will die. The two attendants in her tent were Xie Rou and Hu Jingjing. Both the prestigious families of Guanzhong and the cultivation places of Chongling were victims of Zheng Xiu's rule. They naturally did not have good feelings about Zheng Xiu. At this point, the two girls only felt that there was some kind of karma between the two of them. Even if the 9-death silkworm had not been reborn, there would have been such a battle between the two. But at that time, it is not certain who the world wants to die. Hu Jingjing directly expressed her thoughts, but as husband and wife, they are not even willing to exchange a sword formation. Yuanwu's fickleness and hypocrisy are more disgusting than Zheng Xiu's coldness and betrayal. Women are always easy to sympathize with. The old Wuji woman smiled kindly, her face wrinkled. Especially when we are in similar positions, I can understand that women must pay a great price to sit in this position. Many people's merits and demerits cannot be recorded in the history books. Even the proudest and most talented person is just a wave in the river. The old woman looked at Xie Rou and Hu Jingjing. I have nothing to teach you. You should leave Wuji and go to Jiaodong Commandery. Before Xie Rou and Hu Jingjing could speak, the old woman added, help me bring a gift to Zheng Xiu. Wuji does not have anything good, but there is a jade mask that can restore her beauty. Since she is returning to Chongling to fight Yuanwu, as a woman, this is my gift to her. Xie Rou and Hu Jingjing had always admired this old woman. It was not because of her cultivation, but because of her view of the world, her wisdom, and her tolerance. For a woman, her appearance was her last dignity, especially when such a scene would definitely be described in detail in many ancient books. This was the dignity that the old lady had bestowed upon Zheng Xiu. Are you not happy? Wu Lianzi entered the tent. He was close in age to Xie Rou and the others. Adding on his relationship with Ding Ning and Li Shixing during the war, he had become friends with Xie Rou and Hu Jingjing. The matter of sending them off to Jiaodong Commandery was left to him. He was one of the old woman's favorite imperial grandsons. He often came back to pay his respects, and he could see the old woman's emotions. The old woman and Zheng Xiu had fought for many years. Now that Zheng Xiu had ended, in his opinion, the old woman should be happy. But what he saw was not so. People will die in the end. She is just a bit earlier than me. I will leave this world in the end. So in life and death, there is nothing to be happy about. The old woman told him with a smile. But other people's lives will often become a mirror to look back at themselves. In my opinion, she has been thinking too far and too hard all her life. Just like me now, even if I am in charge of all of Wuji. She looked at Wu Lianzi and lectured seriously. If one day it is your turn to manage Wuji, do not think too much and think too far. There is no foundation in this world that lasts forever. When you close your eyes, everything will no longer exist. Be good to the people around you. Have more people say good things about you. When you die, be happier. This is the meaning of life. It has nothing to do with where you sit. Are people not people? She walked out of the tent and looked at the tall, snowy mountains in the distance. She smiled and said naturally, no matter how strong you are still a person and will not become a god. She said the last sentence to herself. Below Li Mountain, large amounts of palaces were nearing completion. In a palace that had just been completed, the sun, moon, and stars were painted on the ceiling with gold and silver powder, shining brightly. Many wondrous rays of light flew from the world as Yuanwu breathed and danced around him. Yuanwu in cultivation was like a legendary god. A letter was passed to the door of the hall. The official holding the letter was used to grand scenes, but his hands and body were still trembling violently. Because this letter came from Empress Zheng Xiu and was written by her. Yuanwu stopped cultivating, and the profound rays of light disappeared from the hall. He opened the letter that came from afar. Next month, When the moon is full, I will return to Chongling and fight you. I hope you will not break your promise and become the laughingstock of the world." The contents of the letter were simple. Yuan Wu's expression did not change, but his left eyelid inexplicably jumped. This was an invitation to a battle. Many years ago in Chongling, he and Zheng Xiu had exchanged many private letters. But in all the letters back then, Zheng Xiu did not use you. But June, there was a huge difference between fighting with you and fighting with a monarch. Yuan Wu slowly looked up. This letter turned to dust the moment it fell from his hand. The sunlight outside the palace seemed to be blinding. He narrowed his eyes slightly and calculated the time in his mind. This month had just passed the full moon, and the next full moon, it would be less than a month. Actually, I cannot understand. He took a deep breath and sneered and sighed inside. I cannot understand why you are so discontent. No matter if it is towards Jiaodong Commandery back then, towards Chongling back then, towards Wang Jingming, or towards me, you are discontent, forever discontent. Other than harming you, you have harmed everyone. As he was thinking in this cold palace, Tantai Guanjian caught up to a caravan at the Qinchu border. There was a young blind man in the caravan. This grandmaster of the Zhao sword furnace, compared to the battle on the Wei River back then, was less arrogant and more calm. In this caravan, there were many Qin people who had left Chongling back then, such as Wang Taishu. Chapter 873. Wang Taishu was not weak at all. In the years since he left Chongling, he was like Mr. Zhao Yi, who had once been famous in the world. He was too low-key and unknown. Perhaps when all the dust settled, there would not be a single word about him in the history books that recorded the upheavals of the dynasty. But even a young man as arrogant as Xie Chongsheng clearly knew what kind of role he had played in all of this. Great rebels like Bai Shanshui and Zhao Si, Wu Ji and Dong Hu, the exiled generals of the Chu dynasty, and the people of the Bazin Kendo ground. The Qin dynasty was most concerned about the whereabouts of these people. The people who were in close contact with these people were easily discovered by the cultivators of the Qin dynasty. To be able to string these people together, to be able to communicate quickly, to help move many things, and to be absolutely secretive was a very difficult matter to begin with. But Wang Taishu had handled many of these matters well. His low-key and unknown status was the best proof. Some people had bright eyes, but they often did not see some things. Some people were blind, but they could see more clearly. In this caravan, Zhao Yi was the first to sense Yintai Guanjin's arrival. The caravan stopped. The person in charge of the caravan was a border resident of the Chu and had many years of experience as a mounted bandit. Knowing that this was an honored guest from afar, he and his subordinates used the greatest etiquette, hunted a wild goat, and then quickly started to roast it. It has been very strange recently. Everywhere I go, there are special delicacies waiting for me. Looking at the whole goat roasting over the fire, Yintai Guanjin took out Zhao Si's life-bond sword and handed it to Zhao Yi. You probably would not have guessed, but Mr. Zhao Si personally made vegetable soup for me. Even Bai Shanshui has nothing to do and build a little house by the lake. Maybe she wants to be a good wife and mother. It is not strange that my junior sister personally made vegetable soup for you. Zhao Yi appeared thinner and did not have the sharp edge he had in the past. He sat next to Wang Taishu, who also looked like a scholar, and there was almost no difference between them. But when he received the sword, there was an uncontrollable volcanic presence that reverberated in the depths of his energy sea. The flames on the fire beside him suddenly grew fiercer. The horses in the caravan were a little frightened, causing the man who was driving the horses to cry out. Actually, this intrinsic sword is already very powerful. It is even infinitely close to Master's aura. Zhao Yi stroked the sword with his finger, creating a strange line of fire that shone with golden and silver radiance. The sword embryo is especially good. This should be Zheng Xiu's contribution. When you brought this sword here, I knew that she wanted to lend it to Zheng Xiu. But at first I didn't think that I could make it stronger. Zhao Yi smiled at Yintai Guanjin. But you said that she personally made you a bowl of vegetable soup. I understand. While her cultivation and realm have reached master's level in the past, and it is almost certain that she will reach Realm 8 in the future. Her mind is too peaceful. That battle with Ding Ning has used up the grudges and fighting spirit in her heart, or rather, her impatience. Coincidentally, I still have some left. I can quench this sword and increase the chi of the mortal world so that Zheng Xiu will feel more irritated when she holds this sword. That is the only thing I can do for this sword now. Zhao Yi slowly finished his sentence and began to work. A burning presence formed in the plains like the arrival of a scorching summer. Just for a moment, the sword essence that came out of Zhao Yi's body turned into tangible fire crystals that charged at the life bond sword in his hand. This life bond sword did not change on the surface, yet the fire deep in the sword embryo seemed to be awakened. In Zhao Yi's hand, it was like a furnace that could explode at any time. What kind of emotion requires what kind of sword is used? Destruction of jade and stone. There is no you. Zheng Xiu's mind should be very suited to the sword essence of this sword. When my junior sister's sword essence had just formed, our sword furnace was destroyed. Her life bond sword was the most violent Zhao sword furnace sword. Zhao Yi sensed Yintai Guanjin's shock. He smiled and said emotionally, "It is very interesting to be able to participate in the battle between Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu. But I fear that in the future, I will not have such a violent sword essence." Yintai Guanjin understood his meaning. Sword essence depended on one's state of mind. When everything reached the end, Zhao Yi's mind started to calm. "Eat the lamb before leaving." Wang Taishu called to Yintai Guanjin. "If you have nothing else to do, you can even come with me to Chongling to wait for Zheng Xiu. In any case, Yuanwu cannot attend to us at this time." Yintai Guanjin thought and felt this suggestion was good. If everything goes smoothly, what do you want to do after returning to Chongling? He looked at Wang Taishu and suddenly felt curious about these people's future. "I don't want to do anything, I just want to be idle." Wang Taishu laughed. "When I was young, I envied a rich family on the other side of the street. They relied on the savings of their ancestors and did nothing. Every day, they would walk the streets with a toy in their hand. After eating and drinking, they would find people to chat with. They had nothing to do." Sounds good? Wang Taishu's words caused a wave of laughter in the caravan. Doing nothing sounded simple, but it was very difficult to live a peaceful life like this. Many things were gathering towards Zheng Xiu. It seemed that for many grandmasters who were strong enough to change the world, what they needed to do now was to do something for Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu's battle. Everyone in the world anticipated this battle. But the emperor on the throne of Chongling did not want this. In this period of time, some white hair had appeared at his temples. Su Fu did not want to see such a thing happen. He felt that Yuanwu's wisest course of action was to announce to the world that he was going to fight Ding Ning before the news of Zheng Xiu challenging Yuanwu was known to the world. In his view, the situation was getting worse as they waited. He did not know what Yuanwu was waiting for. Chapter 874. Within the Longevity Swallows territory, in a quiet and peaceful village, several villagers were plowing the soil and sowing seeds. They were planting a kind of cassava, their staple food during winter. They heard the sound of horse hooves and wheels in the distance. When they looked up, they saw a tired army marching. These villagers were pioneers. According to the Yin laws, pioneers who moved from other commanderies to develop wastelands could be exempted from 10 years of labor. So while they knew that there had been war in recent days, the war did not seem to have anything to do with them. It was too far away from their world. But the villagers suddenly found that the tired army wore black armor. They did not seem to be the Yin army, but the Qin army. And the tired Qin army did not seem to be in a hurry to travel. When the dust left behind by the Qin army slowly disappeared from their sight, the villagers finally reacted. No matter what reason or method the Qin army had used to pass through here, the fact that the Qin army could appear in the center of the Yin dynasty meant one thing. The Yin dynasty had lost, and lost badly. The world had changed. The villagers started to feel uneasy. But none of this seemed to have anything to do with them. All they had to do was wait. Many things seemed distant if they were not directly related to themselves. Many people appeared powerful and great in the eyes of their opponents. and ordinary in the eyes of ordinary people. At a place not far from the marching Qin army, Zhang Wuji and Zhang Wuji were in the middle of the march. Another Qin army of 10,000 had set up camp. At this time, a young general was walking alone on the riverbank where wildflowers were blooming. He looked very tired, but also very normal. But in this period of time, he had become the military god of the Qin dynasty and the most famous general in the world. He was Bai Qi. In the past, when the Qin attacked the Han, Zhao, and Wei, it created the reputation of the heroes of the Bazankendo ground. Now, the Qin attacked the Yin, and it created Bai Qi's reputation. After leading the army to cut off the connection between the Yin and Qi armies, he led the army straight in and attacked cities in the Yin territory. In more than 40 battles, he had not lost a single one. Among all the battles he had personally led, the most shocking battle was when he led 3,000 Qin soldiers in a surprise attack and defeated 50,000 Yin soldiers. Then, he broke into a big city in the Yin territory and defeated another 70,000 Yin soldiers. Such a glorious victory, with such an unequal number of people, had never been recorded in the history books. However, Bai Qi wasn't arrogant. He knew very well that the Yin army had already lost their will to fight. In his eyes, as long as the Qin army dared to fight, it was almost impossible for them to lose. You don't seem to be in a good mood. If being recorded as the commander-in-chief of the Qin dynasty who unified the world doesn't excite you, what are you thinking about? A voice rang out from the other side of the river. Before he finished speaking, Jing Liuli's figure had already appeared not far from Bai Qi. She was less than 10 feet away from Bai Qi. This distance was already too close for cultivators like her and Bai Qi. But Bai Qi did not react excessively. If cultivators like him and Jing Liuli came with murderous intent, the moment they appeared in each other's perception, it would be impossible to disguise it. You came all the way here to find me. Shouldn't I be the one asking you what you want? Bai Qi turned around and looked at the genius girl who had given him a headache in the past few days, and said indifferently, "My thoughts are actually very simple." Jing Liuli gave a rare smile and said, "I want you to help Yuanwu destroy the Yin, destroy the Qi, and unify the world. Then the world will not be so troublesome. Then Ding Ning will win against Yuanwu. It is just so simple." Bai Qi raised an eyebrow. "It will end like this? The things you have done make people feel that after this, you will win against Ding Ning. I understand what you mean. But when I say win, I mean victory, defeat, life and death. As to me and Ding Ning, it is just like me and my master. In the future, I may surpass my master Bailey Sushue's cultivation and realm. Even if he recovers to his peak, I may not have much time to surpass him. But what is the meaning in that?" Jing Liuli shook her head. "That kind of victory can only be considered victory in the sword. Also, the cultivation of any genius is based on the comprehension and experience of their predecessors. My master told me his cultivation experience. If I went against him in the sword, what kind of victory is this? As to Ding Ning, at least, I am certain that if we were in the same era and cultivated at the same time, I would not win against him in the sword. As to whether I can surpass his highest cultivation in the future, that is not what I am interested in, because there is no meaning. Even an idiot knows that unless the inheritances of the cultivation world are cut off, it is easier for future cultivators to follow in the footsteps of their predecessors and reach higher cultivation. That is not certain. Maybe in the future, the resources useful to cultivators will be used up, just like the spirit veins of Chongling drying up. War can always use up too many things." Bai Qi took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Then he recovered his calmness. "It seems that you still think of Bailey Sushue and Ding Ning as your teachers and friends. But before this, you did not seem to care about their opinions. I thought that what you cared about and wanted to do the most was to surpass everyone in an era and become the strongest. True friends can have different opinions. No one can casually follow the thoughts of others," Jing Liuli said matter-of-factly. "At the start of this great battle, I would be proud and excited. But at this time, I do not care about what kind of existence I will be recorded in the history books, but want to end this war as soon as possible." Bai Qi looked at Jing Liuli. "This is what I think now." Jing Liuli nodded and said, Right now, I fear that only I know what Yuanwu thinks." The words were very sudden. Bai Qi stilled and frowned. "What do you mean?" "You know the result of Huang Jinwei." Jing Lioli looked at his frowning brow and said, "Before this, you seem to have been Zheng Xiu's person. But after Su Fu returned, I found that he had been taking care of you, including letting you be the general that will be recorded in the history books. Therefore, I guess that the fact that you have such a cultivation at such a young age probably has a lot to do with him. Now that I have seen you, I know that my guess is correct. You also cultivated some of his unique methods." Jing Lioli looked at Bai Qi, who was even more stunned, and said, "He also gave those methods to me. Those methods are very useful and powerful. So you and I are his last weapons." Bai Qi's gaze flashed violently. He seemed to understand Jing Lioli's meaning, but he did not speak. Jing Lioli knew that he understood, but she still finished what she wanted to say. "You and I are his backup Huang Jinwei. You and I will be stronger than Huang Jinwei. It is best for him to make us stronger. If he can use one of us, he will have a greater chance of victory. Of course, for him, it is best to use both." Chapter 875. What you say is very reasonable. Bai Qi was silent for a moment and then nodded. When a person like him said such words, it meant that he had considered many things from various angles. He had always been low-key in Chongling, especially after becoming the Qin commander. His personality had become more cautious. But Jing Lioli's personality was always more aggressive than most people in the world. It is not just reasonable. Jing Lioli laughed disdainfully. Her disdain was not because of Bai Qi, but because of Yuanwu, Huang Jinwei, and the mountain of ancestral immortality medicine. Yuanwu is already very strong when controlling such a fake. But if he had enough confidence, he would have challenged Ding Ning long ago. She turned around in disdain and looked in the direction of Chongling. In the early years, among the cultivators of my master's generation, he was the strongest, but he was the most cowardly. He was used to relying on others. He relied on the people of the Bazin Kendo ground to sweep away the imperial power and old nobility in Chongling that obstructed him. He relied on Wang Jingming and the others. Putting aside Wang Jingming's ascension, he mainly relied on Zheng Xiu. Even though he had passed Realm 7 and was the only Realm 8 cultivator in the world at the Deer Mountain Conference, he still ambushed Yi Xinhe. He relied on schemes, and Feng Xiang paid the price of having his cultivation crippled. For someone like him, the only time he was unyielding at the Deer Mountain Conference was when he had everything ready and no accidents could occur. Realm 8s do not dare to challenge Ding Ning's Realm 7s. Unless someone is strong enough to threaten Ding Ning, he will rely on these people to deal with Ding Ning. Other than you and me, there is no one else. Bai Qi nodded, and then Bai Qi relaxed. He looked at Jing Lioli's profile and said, "You came to tell me this. Other than telling me to be wary of becoming a second Huang Jinwei, what other suggestions do you have? After telling you so much, you still don't understand my thoughts. There are too few people in this world who can truly understand my thoughts." Jing Lioli did not answer his question directly and shook her head with a sigh. "I do not know what Wang Jingming was like back then, but I understand the present Ding Ning. The present Ding Ning is not pedantic and much smarter than me. Even if Yuanwu challenged him, he would not accept without confidence. Ordinary people would make wrong judgments due to hatred and their own strength. But I fear that he has settled down for too long after coming back from the dead. His calmness terrify even me. So I never worried that one day Yuanwu would challenge Ding Ning and Ding Ning would lose. What I am worried about is that Yuanwu is a crazy person with no bottom line. He is like this in the matter of Huang Jinwei and also in the matter of Zheng Xiu. He will use all kinds of methods to make himself stronger, but if he delays and does not fight Ding Ning, even if Ding Ning comes to his door in the end, he will likely flee or do something disgusting." Jing Lioli sneered. "What I have done is so that he cannot avoid a fight like this, regardless of whether he goes to Ding Ning or Ding Ning goes to him. You have considered everything." Bai Qi looked with surprise at this genius young girl. If he becomes Yi Xiao in the past, he will have a feeling that there is no end. Jing Liuli snorted. Yi Xiao has a better attitude than him, and has a bottom line. Then under what circumstances do you think he will be forced to fight Ding Ning? Bai Qi grimaced. Jing Liuli said simply, like Zheng Xiao, he will have nothing to live for. No matter what his goal is, Zheng Xiao has paid a great price for him and helped him carry a great deal of infamy. She even destroyed his cultivation. So he wants to do this. Bai Qi frowned deeply. It is not like there will be no resentment in return. It is too difficult to force him to this step. What he cares about the most is his power. Jing Liuli looked at him and said, with power, he is everything. He always has a choice. Cultivation and power are what he cares about the most in this world. At this time, Bai Qi finally understood. He said in surprise, you want to destroy his cultivation? Of course it is best. If not, at least his power will fall. If he is not a grandmaster, and is not much different from ordinary Realm 7s, then his pride can be wiped away. Jing Liuli paused and looked at Bai Qi. If even you can defeat him now, he won't have any energy left. Her last words were crude words that ordinary people would say on the streets of Chongling. At this time, it sounded like she was looking down on Bai Qi. But Bai Qi knew that she was using an analogy. If he could not even defeat the present Bai Qi, then there were many people in the world who could defeat him. For example, Bai Shanshui, Zhao Si, the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect, and even some rising stars. In the past, Wang Jingming had a lot of experience in duels. He would easily make the duel fair, for example, his own cultivation. Jing Liuli smiled faintly. If forcing Yuan Wu into a fair duel is not enough, then it is not hard to find someone to kill him. You came to find me because you want to study Yuan Wu's methods with me? Bai Qi saw the true meaning from the pride in her eyes. I want to see the difference between what he taught you and what he taught me. Also, while you are not as famous as in Baosher and I know that you are a true cultivation genius. It is better for two people to comprehend than me alone. Jing Liuli nodded briskly. In this period of time, I will cultivate with you. As to the future, the chance to make Yuan Wu fall will only exist when he wants to control us like he controlled Huang Jinwei. You will not tell the people of the Bazin Kendo ground of this plan? Bai Qi thought and said, if the people of the Bazin Kendo ground know of my thoughts, maybe Yuan Wu will react. The two sides may not be able to keep the news from leaking. Jing Liuli thought of Dugu Bai who had left. A rare hint of pain appeared in her eyes. Only if the people of Min Mountain Sword Sect do not understand me, and even the people close to me misunderstand me, Yuan Wu will not know my true thoughts. Bai Qi was slightly moved. He looked at her and asked seriously, then you believe me? Jing Liuli said, I know about your matters. You and Yuan Wu are not the same kind of people. Thank you. Bai Qi bowed to her. He had to thank her. If she had not come, maybe he would have the same ending as Huang Jinwei. Now he and she would have the ability to change many things in this world. Or rather, he and she might be able to decide the future of this world. This was more meaningful and fulfilling than leading an army to defeat an opponent who had lost their will to fight and being recorded in the history books. Chapter 876. Chongling, Falling Parasol. The wine shop that Ding Ning and Zhongsun Qinshua lived in had been abandoned for a long time, especially after Ding Ning's identity was revealed by Yuan Wu, because they feared Empress Zheng Xiu's revenge and were afraid of being dragged into an unclear grudge. Many of the neighbors who had the ability to move had moved away. Adding on the group that Ding Ning had moved to Inn Garden, there were not many residents left on this street. Most of the houses were empty, covered in dust, and covered in cobwebs. But ordinary people would not know that compared to the dilapidated state of Falling Parasol, Ding Ning and Zhongsun Qinshua's wine shop was as clean as new. It was almost the same as when Ding Ning and Zhongsun Qinshua had lived. After Ding Ning's identity was revealed, this place had been taken over by the Divinity Bureau and was a forbidden place for any court official. After Chief Inspector Chun betrayed Chongling, and the Divinity Bureau only existed in name, the ones who took over this street were Huang Jinwei's city guards. After Huang Jinwei ceased to exist, the ones who took over this street were Su Fu's old servants. These old servants only listened to Su Fu, and their control of this place was even stricter than when the Divinity Bureau was present. Only these old servants knew that Yuan Wu had come here more than anyone else. Yuan Wu had ordered that every blade of grass and tree here had to be maintained in their original state. This was not out of respect for the strongest opponent of his life, but the places where cultivators like Ding Ning lived would often leave behind traces of cultivation. At this time, Yuan Wu was sitting on the bed where Ding Ning and Zhang Sun Qinxue usually cultivated at night. In his perception, the walls around the bed and under the ground were filled with a deep and cold scent. This was the imprint of the Nine Hell King's sword. However, other than that, there was an exceptionally calm and peaceful aura. It was as if it didn't exist at all, yet it existed gently and silently amidst the deep and cold aura. To be able to be freed from extreme hatred, to be able to peacefully and methodically construct a new world, his own life and cultivation, this was truly terrifying for Yuan Wu. It was bustling just a street away. The fragrance of mutton soup floated in the alley, just one courtyard away from Falling Parasol. 2 new mutton restaurants had opened in this courtyard. They were rivals, each with their own merits. In a mutton restaurant, a milky white mutton soup was being cooked on the stove regardless of whether it was day or night. Pieces of cooked mutton were being dried in a bamboo basket. When diners arrived, they would weigh the mutton according to its weight and pour it into the mutton soup. Then, they would add green garlic leaves and sprinkle a little salt, and a mouth-watering smell would fill the air. The other mutton restaurant was stewed in old soup. Large pieces of mutton with skin were cut up, and the juices were collected in a jar. The oil was thick and red, and the taste was extremely strong. The personalities of the diners in the 2 different mutton restaurants were naturally different. Cold-cut mutton soup was made in the South. Most of the people in this restaurant were scholars and merchants, and many wanderers who had come to the South to study. Most of them had elegant personalities. The strong stewed meat was accompanied by wine. The strong wine was good for the throat. This was the favorite of the border people and the rich people of the north of Guangzhou. Most of these people were bold and unrestrained. When they drank, they even slapped their swords on the table and sang. But today, the things that had faintly reached Yuan Wu's room were all discussing the same matter. Is Zheng Xiu crazy? What is this? Is this true? When have the people of the Bazin Kendo ground ever lied? Since it was public, then according to the rules of Chongling, everyone had to know. Everyone knew that the more people there were, the more fairness there would be. Not many people cared about the duels between ordinary people, but the duel between Zheng Xiu and Yuan Wu. Other than the duel between Ding Ning and Zheng Xiu, or the duel between Ding Ning and Yuan Wu, what other duel was more important and worth watching than this duel? When everyone in Chongling knew Zheng Xiu had left Jiaodong Commandery, things that the people of the world cared about would often be guessed correctly due to countless guesses. News said that Zheng Xiu did not ride the soaring snakes of Jiaodong Commandery, but just like the first time she left Jiaodong Commandery to come to Chongling, she rode the best ship in Jiaodong Commandery to go against the flow to Chongling. This ship was very ordinary on the outside, but extremely beautiful on the inside. After so many years, there was an accurate interpretation of that ship back then. The Jiaodong Commandery families could not tolerate the mockery of the Chongling nobility. They were nouveau riche with poor taste. The ordinary appearance represented their humility and low profile, and the beauty on the inside represented their great wealth. Back then, the most astounding wealth on this ship was Zheng Xiu. Supposedly, when Zheng Xiu came ashore and appeared in front of the people of Chongling, she caused many beauties in Chongling to pale in comparison, and many young talents to lose their souls. Supposedly, she had worn a fish scale robe back then. Her robe was made from fish scales of all kinds of colors in the sea, and had the most beautiful colors in the world. But each scale that had been carefully selected and processed by the craftsmen of Jiaodong Commandery was as soft as a feather, and looked like a feather robe. The Jiaodong Commandery families, who had been thought of as country bumpkins by the nobility of Chongling, emptied the streets of Chongling. Countless people flocked to the port to see the beauty. This time, while it was just a guess, outside of Chongling, many people from many commanderies and counties of the Qin dynasty were heading towards Chongling, towards the port where the Jiaodong commandery's ships had stopped. But after many days, someone from the Bazin Kendo ground confirmed this news. Zheng Xiu would take a ship to that port, and Zheng Xiu would disembark at that port where the battle would take place. Time was a wondrous thing. At the start, there were people who argued about right and wrong. They argued about right and wrong between the Bazin Kendo ground and Yuanwu in the past, and argued about right and wrong between Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu. But as that ship that would appear at an unknown time got closer to Chongling, everyone seemed to forget right and wrong. They seemed to become spectators and the victor of this great battle. If it was reasonable, they would fight. If it was unreasonable, they would fight. The winner was king, and the loser was in the wrong. Compared to victory and defeat, there was no meaning in reasoning. Who cares if it is right or wrong? We will fight. In any case, I feel very good when these two fight. It is boring if they don't fight. There were more and more customers in the two mutton restaurants in Chongling. Gradually, the tables of the two shops almost joined together. A drunkard shout stirred the thoughts of many people. For ordinary people, it seemed even simpler, whether it was exciting or not. Back then, when the Bazin Kendo ground led the Qin people to defeat the Han, Zhao, and Wei dynasties, all the Qin people felt it was exciting. Now, in this battle, regardless of whether the Bazin Kendo ground and Yuanwu were right or wrong, all the Qin people felt it was exciting to fight. If someone avoided fighting, all the Qin people would feel it was boring. Chapter 877. The two sides of the Wei River were filled with all kinds of trees. The leaves were red, yellow, or green, unlike Jiaodong Commandery, which was all the same deep green. Under the clear sky, Zheng Xiu, whose whereabouts had been guessed correctly by some people, sat on the boat from back then and slowly headed towards the port. This boat had cost Jiaodong Commandery a great deal of money and effort back then, so it had been perfectly preserved. The reason the materials were expensive was because time could not stain them. Even after 20 years, they were still as good as new. Zheng Xiu sat in the cabin, feeling it was both familiar and unfamiliar. She looked at the red, yellow, and green on the two sides of the Wei River. Thinking of the novelty she felt when she first came on this boat, she felt a faint sorrow. She came just like when she first came to Chongling, but many people back then had died. Now it was almost her turn. A small boat came from a small river and approached the boat she was on. Yintai Guanjian and Zhao Yi's figures flew up from the small boat and landed at the bow of the boat. The two of them only wanted to bring Zhao Ci's sword to Zheng Xiu. At the same time, they wanted to follow the boat and see the battle. Both Yintai Guanjian and Zhao Yi were not familiar with Zheng Xiu. Also, Yintai Guanjian felt that with Zheng Xiu's mood right now, she probably did not want to talk to them. However, just as he handed the sword to the maid outside the cabin, Zheng Xiu suddenly spoke from inside the cabin. "Thank you." Yintai Guanjian and Zhao Yi were shocked. Yintai Guanjian returned the greeting. "No need to thank me." Zheng Xiu did not come out of the cabin, but inside the cabin, she looked up slightly and bathed in the sunlight. She said, "Back then, when I came to Chongling, no one was waiting for me. I did not know if what awaited me was fortune or disaster. Back then, Chongling was a great mystery to me. But now, at least someone is waiting for me." Her words were simple, but contained indescribable complex emotions. Yintai Guanjian could not respond, and could only smile apologetically and embarrassedly. Who knew what the future would be like? Who knew what kind of person they would become in the future? Since the morning, countless Qin dynasty officials and soldiers in black robes had gathered at the inner harbor of the Wei River. The expressions of these officials were extremely solemn, and deep uneasiness could be seen in the depths of their eyes. Previously, it was just a guess. But when the report came from the Wei River, when Yintai Guanjian and the Grand Master of the Zhao Sword Furnace appeared publicly and boarded the ship from Jiaodong Commandery, everything was confirmed. Just as he had guessed, the mistress of this city was returning. The only thing they couldn't be sure of was how their loyal emperor would react. Would the Yuanwu emperor come? When Emperor Yuanwu came, would he really have a fair duel with Zheng Xiao? This was what they wanted to know, but they didn't dare to discuss. Military information was naturally strictly controlled, and it was impossible for it to quickly spread to the streets and alleys. However, there were people with a keen sense of smell who sensed something strange, and more people gathered outside the port. When large numbers of carriages arrived, it was impossible to hide. When Chongling was almost empty, people came to ask about it and filled the streets. Suddenly, on the banks of the Wei River, many people, especially those on the trees, exclaimed in unison. A black shadow appeared on the surface of the river in the distance. That was a lone ship. It looked ordinary and did not give people the feeling that it had a definite connection to Jiaodong Commandery. However, it was unknown who was the first to speak. Perhaps it was someone who had coincidentally seen the ship before, but when the voice rang out, it was everyone who had seen this ship. Moreover, regardless of whether it was the person who spoke or the crowd who had heard the tide of cries of alarm but had yet to see the ship, they were almost certain that this ship was the one that had brought Zheng Xiao here. The officials at the port were even more certain that this was the ship. They felt even more uneasy. It wouldn't be long before the ship docked at the harbor. But the Yuanwu emperor had not appeared yet, and there was no news from the imperial city. Were they going to stop this ship from entering the port, or were they going to do nothing and just wait? He will definitely come, and he will definitely come to fight with me. In the cabin, Zheng Xiao saw the dense crowd from the window. She saw the Qin dynasty officials and soldiers standing cautiously but uneasily. She smiled coldly and said, "Yantai Guanjian and Zhao." He heard this voice clearly. The two did not know if Zheng Xiao was speaking to them or to them. They did not know if they should respond. This sentence was indeed directed at the two of them. Zheng Xiao added, "It's not that he wants to end things with me, but I know too much about him. He knows very well that if he doesn't come, I will definitely expose all the things he has done in front of these people. In these years, I have taken the blame for him many times. If he wants me to continue to take the blame, he will come." Yantai Guanjian's eyebrows rose. He felt slightly sad, but at the same time, he was shocked. He knew that Zheng Xiao was the person who understood Yuanwu the best in the world. Suddenly, a tsunami-like gasp sounded in the harbor. Then there was an earth-shaking shout for the Holy One. There was no warning, and no one detected how he had appeared. A figure dressed in ordinary coarse clothing, but giving off an indescribable presence, appeared in front of all the officials. He had his back to all the Qin dynasty officials, facing the Wei River and the ship. He stood with his hands behind his back. He stood silently like this. There was no emotion. He did not give off any powerful energy. But everyone knew that he was Yuanwu. Everyone felt that the world was under his feet. The outline of the ship grew clearer in everyone's eyes. Yuanwu did not look back. He just raised his hand and waved it backwards. All the officials and soldiers of Great Qin took 50 steps back at the same time. The spectators outside the port were naturally not soldiers, but at this time, they unconsciously retreated. No one fell due to the pressure. Yuanwu took a deep breath. The port became completely silent. He did not give any orders, but everyone did not dare to breathe loudly. It was deathly silent. This was clearly a life and death situation. But inexplicably, Yuanwu's figure had a strange, infectious power. The deathly silent atmosphere here slowly became tranquil, like an early summer afternoon. A light breeze blew. Many people in the streets were taking an afternoon nap, and some were in a daze out of boredom. The ship arrived. It reached the shore and anchored. The sound of wooden boards and water broke the silence. Zhao Yi and Yantai Guanjian moved to the back of the ship. There was no one at the front of the ship. The cabin door seemed to be pushed open by the wind. A blinding light flashed in everyone's eyes. Yuanwu's eyes narrowed slightly, and some fine wrinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes. Chapter 878. Golden light filled the eyes. Before Zheng Xiao's arrival, everyone had been filled with questions and speculations. But now, Everyone received an answer. Zheng Xiao was not wearing the grand-scale robe she had worn when she first came to Chongling. She was wearing a golden phoenix robe. It was hard to describe the material and gold of this phoenix robe with accurate words. The first feeling this phoenix robe gave people was that it was woven from many kinds of golden threads. Even ordinary people, not cultivators, would have such a feeling. Because the layers of gold were very rich, the threads intersecting to form unimaginably beautiful patterns and seal scripts. But how could there be so many golden threads purer than pure gold in the world? The blinding golden light was not just from the material itself. The unique intertwining power of yuan, qi, gave this golden luster a sense of holiness. The grand-scale robe that Zheng Xiao wore when she first came was beautiful, but in terms of value, craftsmanship, and intimidation, they could not compare to this phoenix robe. When the golden light spread softly on the water and dyed the Wei River golden, the Qin people who woke up from their shock finally noticed Zheng Xiao's face. There was a faint layer of light on her face, like blurry starlight. But what many people who had seen her face before were certain was that she appeared younger than a few years ago, and no different from when she first came to Chongling. Great shock suddenly appeared in Yuan Wu's eyes, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened. In the innermost part of the harbor, there was an abandoned armored ship. In the observation cabin of this ship, Su Fu looked at the dazzling Zheng Xiao and Yuan Wu's back. His eyes were filled with sorrow. Su Fu was old, and his wounds had not completely healed. He appeared even more senile. He was one of the oldest cultivators in the world. He had seen many people and many outstanding geniuses. Among all these geniuses, Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao were undoubtedly the top. In his view, these two were very compatible. If these two could work together, in his view, no one in the world would be a match for this couple. But he could not understand Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao's thoughts. It seemed that from the start, the meaning of their existence was to harm and destroy each other. Why was this happening? The present Zheng Xiao was peerlessly beautiful, but she could not hide the death energy. No matter how strong the present Yuan Wu was, he was gradually growing old. The silent crowd suddenly exclaimed again, and everyone took a few steps back. Because at this moment, Zheng Xiao moved. A majestic aura was slowly released from her body, causing her figure to appear taller in an instant. Although it was daytime, there were still strands of starlight visible to the naked eye that fell from the sky and illuminated the ship. She stood on the boat and was higher than Yuan Wu to begin with. Now that her presence had expanded, she seemed to be looking down from above. Yuan Wu's brow imperceptibly furrowed. He didn't like being looked at like this, especially after he became the first cultivator in the world to reach Realm 8. He did not like people daring to act like this in front of him. He controlled his yuan qi fluctuation. Then, he looked at Zheng Xiao and spoke. His expression was very indifferent, with a hint of self-mockery and ridicule. This is supposed to be a matter between husband and wife. But why is it like this? This sentence was very simple. However, the word husband and wife was very intriguing. Regardless of why Zheng Xiao was forcing them to fight, the two were husband and wife. Husband and wife should abide by some rules, or they could have more meanings. Do you want me to speak? Hearing these words, Zheng Xiao looked coldly at Yuan Wu, with a heart-shaking mockery. You really want people to listen to me speak? Yuan Wu's heart shook, and his gaze turned cold. A sharp sword essence formed in front of him, invisible and intangible, but everyone could clearly feel it. It was right in front of his chest. A light wind blew through the air. The sky above slowly brightened, and a holy light started to chase away the starlight falling from the clouds. The sword across the chest meant that the battle had begun. When one was too disappointed and hated to the extreme, it was hard to feel disgust. But this was the result that Zheng Xiao wanted to see. Yuan Wu felt fear. He feared that she would spit out some secret. With fear, the sword essence would naturally be affected. She did not hesitate at all and attacked. The countless people and cultivators present had never thought that Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao's duel would start so directly. Just like how they had not expected Zheng Xiao to attack at the start. A rainbow seal flew out of Zheng Xiao's golden sleeve. The scales on the talisman shone brightly. Each color seemed to be a different scale. The complete image of this seal only existed for a moment. There was a loud bang. The surface of the Wei River suddenly pressed down a foot. Countless green streams of water burst out of this seal. Each scale of different color turned into different terrifying killing intents, and then intertwined together at an even more terrifying speed. It was like an enormous net being pushed by the spring water and falling towards Yuanwu. Zhengxiu was behind the blue water. The energy vibrations in her body were still very calm. All of the energy coming out came from the seal itself. Yuanwu took a deep breath. He could not imagine a seal in the world that could have such power, and did not need to use up the energy of the person who cast the seal. However, there was no hesitation in his movements. He was unusually simple. He just let the holy light that he had sensed and was floating in the world come down. The faint and holy light suddenly condensed. Under everyone's shocked gazes, it turned into an enormous sword of light. This sword appeared even larger than the ship under Zhengxiu. It easily cut through the blue water and the enormous net. Zhengxiu did not move. Yuanwu had not expected this. The moment the enormous sword of light cut through the blue water and the enormous net, both the separated blue water and the shattered net roared even more fiercely and turned into thousands of bolts of lightning and fire. The black and red lightning and fire danced wildly, covering the world in front of Yuanwu. Yuanwu's breathing paused slightly, the coldness in his body seeping into his bones. The lightning and fire consumed part of his power and turned his energy into it. But right now, the greatest threat to him was not the power of this seal, but Zhengxiu's killing intent contained within. Zhengxiu had already attacked, but he could not sense her sword at this time. Her sword was hidden among the thousands of bolts of lightning and fire. Yuanwu reached out with his hand. A bright yellow sword light appeared in his hand. The sword in his hand did not move outwards. Instead, it began to vibrate at a terrifying frequency in his palm. Chapter 879. There seemed to be golden ripples on the sword. When the ripples appeared and left the sword, they turned into golden phoenix feathers. Countless tangible bright yellow sword energies flew off his sword like thousands of phoenix feathers. They were as dense as a snowstorm and spread into the surroundings. Thousands of lightning and fire were torn apart. Only one pale white starfire danced among the bright yellow sword energies like a candle flame in the wind. This was truly using power to break the path. As these sword energies were formed and activated, Yuanwu's body, in the perception of everyone, even ordinary people, was constantly expanding. He became enormous, immeasurable, and connected to the endless void. He was like an unimaginably tall giant that was connected to the heavens. Without using any tricks, he relied on pure strength to crush all of the talisman intent and force out the starfire sword hidden within Zhengxiu's talisman intent. This was Realm 8 power, but compared to the Deer Mountain Conference, his control of Realm 8 power was clearly skilled and casual. The rapid vibrations created thousands of phoenix, feather-like sword energies. The sword in his hand went from rapid vibrations to absolute stillness without any pause. In the next moment, the sword in his hand had already been thrust towards the cold starfire. The instant reversal from extreme movement to stillness, this kind of scene that did not seem to conform to the laws of the world, caused countless cultivators present to feel uncomfortable. The bright yellow sword light collided with the pale white starfire with incomparable accuracy. But it was not a slash, but a slap. It was a narrow sword light, but it was like an enormous wave in the void. With a muffled hum, the pale white starfire was forced to change direction and charge back at Zhengxiu. Only a little of the starfire dissipated, and its power was only slightly weakened. Ding Ning had a secret sword essence, but that was just borrowing some sword essence. It was like grabbing some traces of sword energy. Compared to Yuanwu's sword, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. Zhaoi could not see this scene, but what he saw in his perception was clearer than most people present. He could not help but shake his head. He had not expected Yuan Wu to be so strong. Even though his present cultivation was not the same as when he had fought on the Wei River, he was certain that if it was him, he may not be able to withstand Yuan Wu's full power attack. There was a muffled sound in the air. Zheng Xiu's body had left the ship and jumped into the air. The battle between cultivators of her and Yuan Wu's level was to see who could take the initiative and control the rhythm of the battle. With the aid of that talisman, she had already seized the initiative. But Yuan Wu's move, as he defeated her sword essence, he turned from attack to defense. This pale, white starfire was still hundreds of feet away from her, but the horrifying power of Yuan Qi had already struck her protective Jin Yuan, forcefully pushing her down from the air. Her feet landed on the ground. A shockwave visible to the naked eye spread from her ankle to the surrounding air. The harbor floor beneath her feet was paved with green rocks. This kind of rock was extremely hard. After countless years of use at the harbor, the trampling of carriages, the friction of ropes, they only left behind faint marks, and the surface was polished smooth. However, as this air wave spread, cracks began to appear on the hard rock. Spiderweb-like cracks swiftly spread. The interior of the rock was like a kettle that had boiled water, as waves of force surged out with a chi-chi sound. Pieces of rock flew into the air and hit the ships along the harbor, creating terrifying sounds of collision. Those ships started to shake violently, and dense wounds appeared on the ships. Zheng Xiu's cold eyes flashed with an unusual light. She had not expected Yuan Wu's cultivation to reach such a level. However, neither her state of mind nor her body was shaken in the slightest. Her feet were like nails stuck into the continuously exploding ground of the port. She reached out her hand towards the falling pale white star. With a boom, there seemed to be a furnace in the world. A heat so hot that the people outside the harbor could not bear it flowed from her hand into the world. At the center of the furnace was the small sword that she held tightly in her palm. The moment the two sword lights touched, the pale white starfire easily crumbled like paper ash. Zhao Xi's life-bond sword had been tempered for a long time in the chaotic flows of starfire. This kind of starfire could not pose any threat to it. Instead, many of the scattered starfire were absorbed by this life-bond sword. This small fiery red sword was surrounded by pale white flames, and it grew larger and larger. Zheng Xiu's movements were so steady they seemed to have stopped, but this sword light was so fast it surpassed the perception of most cultivators present. The sword light tore through the air and stabbed towards Yuan Wu's forehead. In the burning starlight, Yuan Wu's facial features were almost transparent in the light. His eyes seemed to burn. "This is the Zhao sword furnace, sword you have raised for a long time?" However, a mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth instead. As this smile bloomed, unimaginably thick primal energies of the universe surged out of his meridian points. Accompanied by a terrifying tearing sound, the pale white starfire that had gathered around the sword was shaken off the lifeblood sword, turning into floating candle-like objects that shot out in all directions. The intrinsic sword in Zheng Xiu's hand was still tearing through the air. Along with her body, there were afterimages in the air. The bright yellow long sword in his hand that had just finished slapping was raised in a simple and violent manner. Then, like a long stick, it smashed down towards Zheng Xiu's head. The sound of glass shattering sounded in the air. The two swords did not truly meet, but the collision of energies caused Zheng Xiu's body to be sent flying backwards. Her body flew backwards like a wild goose with broken wings. She flew past the shaking ships and smashed into the surface of the Wei River. Yuan Wu's sword-wielding hand only shook slightly. His knees bent slightly, not to dissipate the force, but to exert more power. In the next moment, his figure disappeared from his spot. Today, it was not a complicated battle formation. He only needed to deal with Zheng Xiu alone, so he did not need to be stingy with his vital energy. This kind of battle method was not beautiful, but very practical and domineering. His figure was already above Zheng Xiu. This was a kind of speed and presence that shocked everyone present. The wind that he stirred up caused many smaller boats to sway and even capsize, crashing into the water with a loud bang. He had already raised his sword. In the next moment, this sword would smash down like a giant stick, enough to smash Zheng Xiu into the river bottom. But at this time, something unexpected happened. Zheng Xiu's sword came out faster than him. In other words, Zheng Xiu's sword intent was formed even faster than his. Chapter 880. There was an innate difference between Realm 7 and Realm 8. No matter how Zheng Xiu used the Starfire and relied on Zhao Ci's Lifebond sword, in front of vital energy and the primal energies of the universe, she could only try to shorten the gap between the two and could not reach the point of fighting head-on. To be able to draw his sword faster than him under such suppression, Yi Futian had to admit that Yi Futian was a genius. This could only mean that Zheng Xiu had been acting before. It could only mean that while her vital energy was not as strong as Yuan Wu, the strength of her body surpassed Yuan Wu. An extremely tenacious will could allow the body to perform some actions as quickly as possible even when it was severely injured. But Zheng Xiu's situation clearly was not just due to her will. In Yuan Wu's perception, there seemed to be power spinning rapidly between the flesh and blood in Zheng Xiu's body and exploding. This secret art related to the Vajra body could only come from the Donghu monks. Dozens of starfire surged out of the small sword in Zheng Xiu's hand, passing through his sword essence and landing on his chest. Just dozens of extremely thin starfire. But the moment they landed on his chest, there were countless sharp and ear-piercing sounds of cutting. There were many crystal-like sword energies in the starfire, like dazzling gems. But these extremely condensed sword energies were unable to pierce Yuan Wu's flesh, and only cut open the clothing on his chest. Dozens of black scales appeared on Yuan Wu's skin and spat out black flames. The glowing sword energies in the starfire and the black flames collided, and were blocked, and then quickly turned to fine powder. There was a loud bang. Yuan Wu's sword energies landed on the water. Where the sword tip landed, the energy immediately reached the bottom of the Wei River and forced away all the water. In the next moment, the water that was forced away formed an enormous ring-shaped wave and exploded outwards with thousands of caddies of sand. Zheng Xiu's body flew backwards as the water sprayed. There was some surprise in Yuan Wu's eyes. She also had surprise in the depths of her eyes. The scales that appeared in front of Yuan Wu's chest had a presence she was familiar with. These were the Nether Dragon scales, but they were not the scales of the Nether Dragon that Bailey Sushua was riding. Yuan Wu's dozen Nether Dragon scales had an even more ancient presence, deeper and purer. They even felt like they had been tainted by a presence above Realm 8 for a long time. This could only come from the Yu dynasty of the past. It was not surprising that the royal family of the Qin dynasty had some relics from the Yu dynasty. But even more importantly, even she had never known that Yuan Wu possessed such a thing. Yuan Wu's expression did not change after taking Zheng Xiu's blow to the chest. He knew Zheng Xiu too well. From the moment Zheng Xiu wanted to duel with him, he knew that Zheng Xiu wanted to destroy him as well as himself. Even if she couldn't kill him in the end, Zheng Xiu would definitely force him to use all of his concealment methods. It was the same for him. He also wanted to see through Zheng Xiu how powerful Wang Jingming and the people around Wang Jingming were. The black scales on Yuan Wu's chest disappeared. He stood on the enormous wave and looked at Zheng Xiu. He did not give chase, just took a deep breath. As he adjusted the flow of energy in his body, he drew a flower with his sword. It was a very simple sword move, but the surging sword chi on the sword instantly turned the world in front of him into a vacuum. Astounding primal energies of the universe were sucked in by this vacuum, but they did not gather on the sword in his hand and appeared behind Zheng Xiu. A sword light silently appeared behind Zheng Xiu as she flew backwards and fell towards the back of her neck. Seeing Yuan Wu's sword and sensing the unique presence in this sword energy, gasps sounded outside the harbor. Most of the gasps were from cultivators dressed in blue or purple robes. These cultivators all came from Lingshu Sword Gate. Lingshu Sword Gate was as famous as Min Mountain Sword Sect. These cultivators were not like ordinary cultivators who would easily have strong emotions. They were shocked because Yuan Wu's sword was a secret sword of Lingshu Sword Gate, and one that they could not comprehend or grasp. The secret swords of the sects were called secret swords not because they were hard to grasp, but because they were powerful and unique. They were powerful sword essences that the Grand Masters of the sect had comprehended on the basis of some of the sect's sword manuals. They contained many of the cultivation paths of the sect and the understanding of energy and laws. Ordinary sect disciples did not want to teach them to avoid outsiders knowing about them. The secret swords of any sect naturally represented great lethality that surpassed ordinary sword moves. Now, Yuan Wu's seemingly casual sword was the same. But what shocked these Lingshu Sword Gate cultivators who reacted the fastest was that Zheng Xiu did not even wave her sword to block the sword energy that appeared behind her. The small sword in her hand started to burn even more fiercely. Two violent flames surged from the depths of the sword embryo. One type of flame was extremely condensed and firm, like red iron that had been tempered thousands of times. The other type of flame howled with strong winds, as if someone had swung a giant hammer countless times and then compressed the strong winds that were stirred up into this type of flame. These two kinds of flames came from the energy of Zhao Yi and Zhao Si, but they also carried the terrifying heat of the Zhao sword furnace that could burn everything. But the moment these two flames surged, many pale white starlight danced out of the meridians in Zheng Xiu's body like thousands of little snakes and merged into these two kinds of flames. The three kinds of flames merged and quickly turned cold. They turned into a flame, sword energy, without any temperature. This sword energy ignored the attack coming from behind her and pointed murderously at Yuan Wu's throat. Yuan Wu's attack was faster than hers. This sword light landed on the back of Zheng Xiu's neck. A strange and shrill phoenix cry sounded in the air. Zheng Xiu's golden phoenix robes released an unimaginable pressure. Golden light formed in front of this sword energy and forced this sword energy to stop in the air. The two powers were at a stalemate, and there were cracking sounds in the golden light. First, there were cracking sounds in the tiny formations of the golden phoenix robes that could not be seen with the naked eye. Then it was Zheng Xiu's neck, and even her bones and flesh. At this time, in the perception of most cultivators, even though Zheng Xiu's phoenix robes had unimaginable defensive power, Yuan Wu's attack still caused serious injuries to her, and was enough to cause her body to shatter. But in this short time, a kind of cold death energy spread out like a tide from deep inside Zheng Xiu's body. The other cultivators had not sensed this presence, but a hint of coldness appeared in Yuan Wu's eyes. He sensed it. He had a deep impression of this presence. This came from the most terrifying opponent he had encountered in the Deer Mountain Conference, Yanning. Blackness seeped out of Zheng Xiu's white skin. She did not die. Her body did not immediately disintegrate. The sword in her hand did not slow down at all. The cold and extinguishing flame fell towards Yuan Wu's throat. Chapter 881. Yuan Wu's lips were pressed tightly together. They were as thin as blades, but a heated flame suddenly burned deep in his eyes. In this moment, he felt anger and then pride. The anger came from the familiar presence of Yanning. Yanning, the cultivator of the Thousand Tombs Mountain, was a freak to start with. He had refined the entire Thousand Tombs Mountain into his life bond item, and had given him a heavy blow at the Deer Mountain Conference, causing him to be injured and unable to recover. Yanning had left behind a disciple. Clearly, Zheng Xiu's methods had been taught by that disciple. The methods of the Donghu monks, the life bond, sword of the Zhao sword furnace, the Yin and ghostly secret methods of the Thousand Tombs Mountain, and this golden phoenix robe, it seemed that all the powerful sects and cultivators in the world had become his enemies and hoped for his death. Pride was also due to this. Just like Wang Jingming in the past, only the top cultivators in the world could become the enemy of the world. I don't know what you're struggling about, and I don't know what you're unwilling to accept either. If you were willing to be a good wife, you wouldn't have ended up in such a situation, he said when the flames of arrogance burned in his eyes. As soon as the first word was spoken, a majestic force came crashing down. This power was like an enormous invisible wall and was not unfamiliar to the cultivators of Chongling. The old man Mo Shocheng, who had guarded Chongling from the turret, had used such power more than once. Today, this power came from afar. In a corner of the harbor, many imperial palace cultivators were gathered around, and many carriages were parked. There were many important court officials inside, and Huang Jinwei. Just as many people had expected, from the start of the battle, Yuan Wu could not make Huang Jinwei appear. Even though the news of Huang Jinwei being controlled by him and turned into a puppet had spread through the streets of Chongling, when the battle was over, when the Qin dynasty's army defeated the Yin, and they could unify the world, this matter would be ignored and even forgotten. However, if Huang Jinwei, who had been turned into a puppet, appeared under his control in front of everyone, the situation would be very different. The strong visual impact made most people feel that Yuan Wu was too cruel. However, not allowing Huang Jinwei to appear did not mean that he could not borrow Huang Jinwei's power. This boundless energy that was like an invisible wall originated from the deathly, still carriage. There was a loud bang. The cold flame stabbing towards Yuan Wu's throat smashed into this invisible wall. Yuan Qi violently collided and devoured each other. Cracks appeared in the void like lightning. Yuan Wu's hand had already reached out faster than lightning. A bright yellow sword light appeared in the air like a shooting star. It seemed to break through the boundaries of time and space. With a terrifying whistling sound, it instantly smashed towards Zheng Xiao. Zheng Xiao's body trembled violently. She forcefully retracted her sword and stabbed upwards. Pa! Another teeth-numbing collision sound rang out in the air. A burning smell rushed into their nostrils, making them feel extremely uncomfortable. A slight bone-cracking sound was masked by the impact. Zheng Xiao's sword-wielding hand fell in a strange posture. Her right hand had been broken by Yuan Wu's sword. Yuan Wu's voice continued to reach her ears. Even now, Yuan Wu had not finished speaking. The breaking of the arm did not mean that the powerful impact had disappeared. Her body rapidly fell to the surface of the water. When her feet landed on the surface of the water below exploded layer by layer due to the powerful pressure, turning into glowing mist. This mist charged at her body like tiny pieces of diamond sand, causing countless small holes to appear on her skin. Black blood sprayed out of the holes. What other moves do you have? Yuan Wu put away his sword, looked at her, and said. She was in such a terrible state. Even if she borrowed the power of the great grandmasters of the world, it was only so. As far as he was concerned, this battle should end here. But at this time, his eyebrows suddenly rose. He was slightly puzzled and inexplicably fearful. Zheng Xiao naturally did not care about life and death, but the feeling of pain would not disappear. At this time, Zheng Xiao should be in great pain, but her eyes were still cold and did not change. Her left hand caught the small sword in her right hand, and she looked up at Yuan Wu. A terrifying sound came from her body, like the roar of a river bursting through a dam. The true essence in her body gushed out without reservation and poured into the small sword in her left hand. This terrifying speed of pouring vital energy almost caused the strongest sword of the Zhao sword furnace to reach its limit. The entire sword nucleus started to shake uncontrollably from inside out. Yuan Wu took a deep breath. His senses were sharper than all the cultivators present. He sensed a murderous intent that had come earlier than the power of this sword. Many invisible starlight suddenly appeared in this part of the world. In his perception, these starlight danced in the sky like fireflies on a summer day. This starlight came from the stars outside this part of the world. Naturally, it could only have come from Zheng Xiao's vital energy. This kind of starlight did not have any cohesion. Theoretically, it was no different from the natural sunlight and did not have any killing power. But when such starlight appeared in his perception, many energy stars that he usually could not sense in his vital energy and blood suddenly lit up. Countless starlight like this appeared in his blood, and vital energy. This kind of starlight was not under his control at all. They danced wildly in his body, and even flew out of his body. He was breathing deeply because of inexplicable palpitations. At this time, his breathing unconsciously stopped, and he felt unusually uncomfortable. This kind of energy that was not under his control formed naturally, and was no different from ordinary people being poisoned. Spirit Lotus Seed. In this moment, he understood where this starlight came from. When he officially ascended the throne and became the Yuanwu Emperor of the Qin dynasty, Zheng Xiu used the spirit veins of Chongling to set up a spirit spring pool, and then started to cultivate spirit lotuses. The spirit lotus absorbed the spirit energy of the spirit veins and gathered the essence of the world. It was the strongest healing item in the world. However, it was only at this moment that an image that he had neglected suddenly appeared in his mind. There was a strange well above the spirit spring pool. The starlight of the night came through the well, and countless blurry lights fell into the spirit spring pool. So from that time, from when this spirit lotus started to grow, this spirit lotus already contained your hidden poison. So this is the true, most vicious method. This spiritual lotus seed of yours was prepared to be used against me right from the start. Yunwu laughed a shrill laugh. Chapter 882. Yuanwu had always been a very conflicted person. He had always been very low-key, or rather very patient and calm. When the people of the Bazankendo ground had dominated the world, he had not shown much of his cultivation. Many of the stories that people talked about, the stories that made people's blood boil, the stories that many young cultivators yearned for, rarely mention him, or only his faint shadow. So many of the storybooks and records of the cultivation world had been burned after he ascended the throne. It was not a pity, but he undoubtedly desired success, desired to make a name for himself, and become the one and only saint ruler in history. He had many proud moments. For example, when he destroyed the Bazankendo ground and caused the strongest sect of the time to quickly disappear. He used strong tactics to suppress the army and smoothly ascended the throne. For example, after flattening the mountain at the Deer Mountain Conference, he started to call himself this lonely one. In his view at the time, there was no one in the world who could compare to him. In his past, even if he did not say it, many people could guess that what he was most proud of was killing Wang Jingming and stealing Wang Jingming's woman, Zheng Xiu. No matter how much he and Zheng Xiu schemed against each other in the end, even to the point where they had to fight to the death in the end, at least in those years when he first ascended the throne, he naturally felt that Zheng Xiu naturally chose him for emotional reasons other than mutual benefit. In the end, the disgust after these years, in his view, was because Zheng Xiu's ambition could not be satisfied and was growing, and he had disappointed Zheng Xiu more and more. But what was reality like? From the start, Zheng Xiu felt that he was just a tool to complete her ambition. Or in any aspect, in Zheng Xiu's heart, he could not compare to Wang Jingming. Maybe from the start, he had not received any true feelings from Zheng Xiu, or maybe Zheng Xiu had been in regret and frustration these years, so she disliked him more and was more and more disappointed in reality. If some things were not asked, and some things were not said, there would never be an answer. But in Yuanwu's view, those spirit lotuses that had been bathed in starlight from the start were the answer to the question. This answer, like the star energy burning in his body, was like thousands of ants gnawing at his heart. Zheng Xiu did not look at his sad smile, because she could no longer see. She had relied on poison and secret techniques to recover her strength. At this moment, all the power in her body surged out, and she was truly at the end of her rope. Her eyes lost their light, and even the moisture in her eyes was evaporated by the scorching aura emitted by her sword. At this time, she was already numb and had no feelings of love or hate. As for her own life, she had no answer. At this point, she no longer thought about it. All thoughts were empty. She was extremely focused, as if she had put her entire life into this sword. She took the last step of her life. This sword was like a path of no return. Not far from her and Yuanwu, Zhao of the Zhao sword hut changed expression. The sword intent of the Zhao sword furnace had always been a sword of death. Forgetting myself, going forward without any return. But even he couldn't display the sword intent that Zheng Xiu was displaying now. At this time, Zheng Xiu's sword essence and the sword essence of the Zhao sword furnace were in perfect harmony. Yuan Wu laughed bitterly. He looked viciously at Zheng Xiu. However, he couldn't see Zheng Xiu's face clearly. The world in front of him seemed to have been completely ignited by this sword. The enormous cauldron fell and caused his vision to turn red. The star Yuan Shi, that was like an undispellable poison that was passing through his body, caused his reaction to slow down a little. He swung his sword and blocked Zheng Xiu's sword. He was so angry he had never been so angry. He could not control the power surging in his body. But then there was a crack. His wrist bone, holding the sword, could not withstand the collision of the two sword essences and broke. He howled in pain. His vital energy wrapped around his wrist like ropes, causing his entire arm and his life-bond sword to become one. The sword did not stop moving. Bam! The burning true fire parted like waves in front of him and passed over his head and feet like a wall. Zheng Xiu, along with her sword, was sent flying by his incomparably tyrannical slash. But at the same time, a crack sounded from his right shoulder. His right shoulder was in great pain, so painful it reached his heart. The bones of his right shoulder were all shattered. Some of the broken bones even pierced through his flesh and came out. Ah! He gave an even greater cry of pain. This cry was like the howl of a wild beast, containing countless emotions. Most of all, it was disbelief. His body started to tremble because of the pain and the agitation of his emotions. The air around him was fiery red. However, his face was so pale that it was devoid of blood. Half of his body was dyed in blood. His right hand could no longer hold his life-bond sword. The bright yellow sword light fell powerlessly from his hand. He did not know if it was sweat from the heat or cold sweat from the pain. His hair was drenched in sweat. The messy strands of hair stuck together and stuck to his forehead and cheeks. Yuan Wu had never been in such pain in his life, and had never been in such a sorry state. Zheng Xiu's body was flying backwards. Her body was empty. Because it was empty, she was relaxed. She had never been so relaxed in her life. If she had ever been so happy. She used all of her emotions and her entire life into this blow. She was inexplicably happy. Her consciousness started to fade. But a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. The burning heat in the surroundings made her feel warm. She felt like she was closing her eyes in the warm spring sun of Jiaodong Commandery, falling down from the mountain filled with golden flowers, falling into a deep sleep amidst the warm fragrance. Amidst Yuan Wu's painful cries, the outside of the harbor and even the surface of the Wei River was silent. No one looked at Yuan Wu, but at her and the sword in her hand. Everyone felt very unfamiliar with the situation. At this time, Zheng Xiu was completely different from the coldness she usually gave others. She was unusually warm, but her figure quickly faded from everyone's sight. Only the crimson red sword was still spitting out chaotic flames. Her body started to crack, turned to ash, and turned to red embers dancing with the flames. Multiple cracks appeared on the golden phoenix robe. It did not completely disappear and slowly fell towards the river below. The crimson-red sword paused in the air for a moment. On the dilapidated ship, Zhao Yi bowed in the direction where Zheng Xiu had disappeared. He could not judge Zheng Xiu's life, but at least in this last battle, this blow, he felt enough respect. The crimson-red sword flew back to him, and he put it back into his sleeve. Chapter 883. The crimson-red sword flew back to his sleeve and gave off a clear sound like it was returning to its scabbard. While this sound was short, it was unique. The Qin troops in the harbor suddenly grew nervous. In a flash, many sword lights lit up in the harbor. Many flying swords floated in the air like poisonous snakes coming out of their caves, waiting to strike as they vibrated slightly. Zhao Yi slowly looked up. The sunlight shone on his face, illuminating his lightless eyes, and the faint disdain on his face. He looked at the flying swords, and then turned to step onto the Wei River behind him. He walked as though he was walking on flat ground, but not as silently as Yi Siling when he returned to Chongling. When his footsteps landed on the water, they sounded like thunder. He did not speak, but these exceptionally powerful footsteps were telling the masters of these flying swords. Does my Zhao sword hut have cultivators who take advantage of others? This was the pride of the Zhao sword furnace. Even Yuanwu was not an exception. Yintai Guanjin sighed. He also started to turn and leave. Zheng Xiu had died in battle, and Yuanwu was seriously wounded. One dead, one seriously wounded. This was a good result for Min Mountain Sword Sect and the Bazin Kendo ground. Yet when Zheng Xiu turned to dust and disappeared, his heart felt slightly empty. For some reason, he sympathized with Zheng Xiu's life. She is also a pitiful person. This thought rose in his mind, but then he could not help but laugh at himself. Maybe it was because Zheng Xiu's sword essence had been so perfect in this battle that he was affected. Maybe it was because Chongling and the world for so many years had people like Zheng Xiu that it was so exciting. Maybe for a long time in the future, no matter who it was, the world would be lonely. Yintai Guanjin's emotions were the emotions of most Qin people inside and outside the harbor. In the battle between Zheng Xiu and Yuanwu, many unimaginable changes had occurred, especially the star energy in the spirit lotus seed. Especially those who knew the truth. They knew that Zheng Xiu had spent a lot of effort on this spirit lotus seed. When Yuanwu was seriously injured after the Deer Mountain Conference, and there was a gap between the two, Zheng Xiu was unwilling to give the spirit lotus seed to Yuanwu to heal. In the end, Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu reached an agreement and finally obtained the spirit lotus seed. It was like Zheng Xiu had hidden the poison, but Yuanwu had thought of all the ways and paid a great price to beg Zheng Xiu to give him such a poison. From a certain point of view, this battle had gathered the methods of the top grandmasters of many sects in the world. From seal path to sword forging, to body cultivation, in spirits and ghosts, this was the most exciting battle after Wang Jingming's battle in Chongling. Even the battle between Wang Jingming and Zhao Si could not compare to this battle. Yet, regardless of the process of this battle, when this battle ended, regardless of whether it was looking at the falling phoenix robe or Yuanwu, who was still uncontrollably trembling while no longer crying out in pain, everyone felt a sense of loss. Zheng Xiu had really died like this and disappeared like this? Before most people could recover from their emotions, Su Fu appeared next to Yuanwu. Su Fu used a new robe to cover half of Yuanwu's body. In the next moment, he and Yuanwu's figures disappeared from everyone's sight, returning to a carriage that was speeding over from behind. The moment Yuanwu sat firmly in the carriage, a painful grunt came from his mouth again. A hissing sound came from the skin on his body. Some chaotic but condensed energy, filled with killing intent, was forced out of his body and tore apart the new robe on his body. To end here, this whore. Yuanwu's lips were pressed together tightly. As he spat out a mouthful of blood, he gave off an extremely deep beast-like roar. His emotions were out of control at this moment. In his life, he had never been so agitated. He had never said such irrational words, and had never lost his composure like this. Su Fu did not enter the cabin of his carriage. He was in a carriage in front of Yuanwu. With his cultivation, he could easily hear such a voice. Su Fu took a deep breath and closed his eyes in a pained manner. In the chaos of Chongling back then, he had chosen Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu. In his view, Yuanwu was the orthodox of the imperial family. With Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu's power, the Qin dynasty would not be too far away from unifying the world. Now, even the Chu and Yin had been destroyed, and only the Qi dynasty was struggling at death's door. The Qin dynasty would not be too far away from unifying the world. But the two people he had thought highly of back then were like this. Why was it like this? There was no meaning in thinking about it. The key was how to end it. He took a deep breath, but it was like he had inhaled the entire winter, and his body was extremely cold. It was bleak inside and outside the port. The former mistress of Chongling, the strongest genius in the history of Jiaodong commandery, gathered the methods of many grandmasters in the world, but still lost to the powerful emperor of Chongling. As a person of Chongling, he should feel happy and proud. But the Yuanwu emperor left on a carriage like this. Before this powerful emperor disappeared, everyone saw Zhao Yi put away his sword. All the Qin swordsmen in the port acted like they were facing a great enemy. Everyone saw the emperor's pain and wounds. This was very different from the Holy One in their minds and memories. Had he really won? Most people were puzzled. Not only was he invincible, but many things also seemed to be very different from His Majesty in their memories. The widest path naturally flowed for the Yuanwu emperor's carriage to return to the imperial city. Along with it were the carriages of many cultivators and the chariots of the army. More carriages that did not belong to this group blocked some of the smaller paths. However, within these blocked carriages, there were actually many existences that could be considered important to the entire world at this time. There was still chaotic energy flowing through the world, blowing at the curtains of the carriages. Zhao Gao was in a blocked carriage like this. Each time the curtains swayed, the light in the carriage would turn from bright to dark, from dark to bright, like a world was disappearing in front of him. He looked woodenly at the light in front of him. His gaze did not search for the Yuanwu emperor's carriage, but his emotions were extremely complicated. Zheng Xiu was finally dead. How did it feel to get revenge? It did not seem to be happy. But people's encounters always seemed to be dreamy. After he entered the imperial palace as a famous doctor and did these things, he had not thought that he could live for long. But when Zheng Xiu died, when the Divinity Bureau disappeared, when Zheng Xiu's former loyal subordinates disappeared, many of the things he did were not so easily exposed. Yuanwu was seriously injured now, but he controlled all the medical officials in the Qin dynasty's imperial palace, and even many invisible powers. He did not seem to be a piece of trash who had one foot in the grave after getting revenge. From this moment on, he suddenly became even more important to the entire world. Chapter 884. The people inside and outside the port gradually left. For the cultivation world, the one who had died was Zheng Xiu. She was the best cultivator in the history of Jiaodong Commandery and one of the strongest people in the world. But for ordinary Chongling people, the one who had died was the mistress of Chongling and the person who had truly managed Chongling in the last decade. In reality, almost everyone knew that in the dozen years after ascending the throne, Yuanwu had spent most of his time cultivating. Before today, everyone in Chongling only had an impression of coldness and betrayal toward Zheng Xiu. But when they truly lost this mistress, when they started to think with their heads bowed, they had some inexplicable feelings. The stories in the court that angered them were not as real as the battle that had happened in front of them today. In these years, they were all used to hearing how cold she was to her opponents, and how heartless she was when she gathered power in her hands. But in these dozen years, were the people of Chongling not living well? Most people had wine to eat, meat to eat, and lived prosperous and stable lives. All of them had adapted to the way this mistress ruled Chongling, and were used to such a life. But starting today, they had to adapt to Chongling without this mistress. What difference would there be? All of these ordinary people, who could not see far, were confused and confused. The news of the death of the Qin dynasty's empress, Zheng Xiu, spread like the wind through the plains. A secret letter carrying the news of her death quickly reached Jiaodong Commandery. Ding Ning opened the letter. When he put it down, the letter turned to dust. He walked to the top of the cliff, looked at the sea, and the various parts of Jiaodong Commandery. Zhang Sun Qinxue appeared behind him and did not speak. While I do not care, and had expected this, I cannot help but feel sad when I hear the news. Ding Ning did not conceal anything and said softly. Zhang Sun Qinxue understood his feelings. Just like back then, she had hated Wang Jingming so much. But when she heard that Wang Jingming had died in battle in Chongling, she would also feel sad. She did not say anything and just took Ding Ning's hand. Ding Ning smiled faintly. He exhaled deeply. Life was really strange. Some people also found it strange. Ever since cultivators appeared in this world, Many people seem to be pursuing a longer life. The ultimate goal was longevity. But no matter what others thought, in his opinion, was longevity really meaningful? A period of time was an eternal feeling. Most of the time, the experiences and memories of growing up could not be replaced. When the number of friends was decreasing, even the number of enemies was decreasing. If one could truly live forever, their old friends and enemies would pass away one by one. Even if new friends and enemies appeared, the years of the past would no longer exist. The new people would still be juniors. They could only constantly remind themselves that they were already very old. Would he really not get tired of not returning when he was too old? The news spread beyond Een Mountain and into the depths of the grassland. In the meadows, the old Wuji woman read the detailed reports about this battle and did not feel any joy. Ding Ning had experienced too many things, from a talented young swordsman to the leader of the strongest cultivation place, and then on this path of revenge. After going in circles for more than a decade, he finally got close to what he wanted to accomplish in the past. Regardless of whether Ding Ning looked young now, he was no longer the young and bright swordsman of the past. He started to yearn for the past. This meant that his mentality was starting to grow old, just like Zhao Si and Bai Shanshui. However, this old woman was truly old. When she was so old that she started to forget many things, it was even scarier, and she would feel that many things were meaningless. So for this old woman, the surprises that many major events in the world brought her were not as good as finding a flower she liked blooming on a stroll, or her two dogs giving birth to a litter of cubs. The news spread to the Yin territory, or rather, the Qin territory, because the Yin dynasty no longer existed. The camp of the Qin army in the Yin territory was dead silent. All the generals looked with heavy hearts at their commander Bai Qi. Bai Qi's present status was largely due to Zheng Xiu's exceptional promotion. What kind of effect would Zheng Xiu's death have on him? Check in advance if there are any problems with the food supply. However, what they didn't expect was that Bai Qi only said these words and then walked out of the tent. He walked into Jing Liuli's tent and told Jing Liuli the news. Much stronger than I imagined. Jing Liuli was the calmest person. She just said, I had not thought that she could even use a spirit lotus seed like this. This is the life bond item she raised for so many years. But this is even simpler. She caused Yuan Wu to be so seriously injured. Yuan Wu is most likely hiding in the palace formation Li Si built for him and cannot go anywhere. He will not be able to stop or use you and me. I guess that you want me to lead the army into the Qi and ignore his orders. Bai Qi looked at Jing Liuli and said, When I saw the news and discussed with my subordinates, I thought that you would think this. You guessed right. I also guessed that Yuan Wu's orders will arrive soon. He will have you withdraw the army and return to Chongling. Jing Liuli sneered. After all, you are his saving grace right now. Bai Qi did not question the words. He just shook his head and said, It is not so simple to lead the army into the Qi. While the Qi army is not strong, there will be problems with food, especially after I lead the army and ignore Yuan Wu's orders. Not just food, there will be problems with horses and chariots. Without enough horses and chariots, my army is exhausted before even coming into contact with the Qi army. They have no power or will to fight. You do not have a solution to this, but I know someone who has a solution. Jing Liuli smiled faintly. Chun Sheng, who is powerful on the Yin-Qin border, is he not the so-called prodigal son of the Xie family, Xie Chongsheng? These words did not cause much shock to Bai Qi. He just frowned slightly and said calmly, As long as you can ensure food, I will finish this battle with you. Jing Liuli nodded calmly. You can start preparing. Bai Qi nodded and left the tent without another word. Jing Liuli opened her brush and ink in a rare move and started to write a letter. She rarely wrote, so her writing was not beautiful. But the strokes contained sword essence and looked to be of its own. She wrote very carefully. She wrote all her thoughts, including what she was going to do and what she was going to do in this letter. Chapter 885. The news of Zheng Xiu's death was still spreading to even more remote places. Even in the barbarian kingdoms outside the borders of the Yin dynasty, the kings of many tribes felt sorrow when they heard about the demise of the mistress of the Qin dynasty. Regardless of whether it was the Qin dynasty or the Yin and Qi dynasties, these remote kingdoms and tribes that lived from hunting and fishing were called the Central Plains dynasties. The Central Plains dynasties meant wealth and civilization. Most of these remote kingdoms and tribes wanted to lead their armies to break through the borders and take a share from the Central Plains dynasties, or become a part of them. From a certain point of view, Jiaodong Commandery had always been looked down upon by the old nobility of the Qin dynasty, because in their eyes, Jiaodong Commandery was no different from those fishy fisherman tribes. Jiaodong Commandery and Zheng Xiu were the targets of these barbarian tribes' successful counterattack, especially when Zheng Xiu became the mistress of Chongling, and many of the battles against them came from her. Zheng Xiu became a godlike existence in the hearts of many barbarian tribe leaders. Fear, respect, worship. Many of the barbarian tribe leaders who were enemies with Zheng Xiu looked forward to the day they could see this beautiful and powerful legendary empress. Many people were inexplicably unhappy because of this, especially some of the barbarian kings who had lent troops to the Yin dynasty. In the past, while they knew it was impossible, they said they would enter Chongling and capture Zheng Xiu to make her their concubines. Now that Zheng Xiu was dead, there was nothing left to talk about. It was as if there would be no more important programs in the future. A tribe king angrily smashed his favorite wine cup. A tribe king burned a set of brocade robes he was going to wear when he entered Chongling. The atmosphere in many palaces was very cold and strange. But the coldest and strangest was naturally the imperial palace of Chongling. After the Yuanwu emperor was wounded and left the harbor, he did not return to the Qin imperial palace in Chongling, but went directly to the newly built Afang imperial palace on Erli Mountain. The imperial palace there was very new, grand, and large. Some official residences and institutions were moving there. But at least before this, there was no decree to destroy the Chongling imperial palace. Most of the palace people were still in the Chongling imperial palace. So the two sides were cold and cheerless. There were very few people in the imperial palaces on both sides. It was like a dead city, filled with a dense aura of death. Among the kings of the world, the most thought-provoking was naturally Yuanwu's mood right now. But other than Yuanwu, who else knew his emotions right now? Yuanwu was in a bedroom in the deepest part of a Pang palace. All of the furniture in his bedroom was made from a strange black jade. Even though the bed was covered with the softest mattress in the world, for Yuanwu, it was still too hard. He was very tired at this time. Fighting against an opponent of equal strength used up too much energy. This battle was more taxing on his mind than the Deer Mountain Conference. What he needed most was rest, but he couldn't sleep. He could not sleep peacefully in any position. His injured arm rested on the soft mattress of the bed, not daring to make any movements. The kind of pain still made his body tremble. If the bones and meridians were shattered, it would be very difficult to recover. For a long period of time, he could only lie down quietly. However, in his perception, the most painful thing came from the true essence flowing in his body. For a cultivator like him, vital essence was the qi and blood that provided nourishment for his entire body. Over countless years of cultivation, it had merged with the essence of the spiritual qi of the world, constantly removing impurities, constantly condensing, and constantly changing. The vital essence that flowed through his body had long since become the best spiritual medicine in the world, and it was the spiritual medicine that was most suitable for him. These spirit medicines helped his body to grow stronger, gave him more energy, and even stimulated his potential. But now, the vital energy flowing through his body was not like this. When Zheng Xiu had fought with him, she had suddenly activated the star energy that even he could not detect. Even in the eyes of outsiders, he had forced all the star energy out of his body at once. But there was an essential difference between energy and material impurities. It was just like how the countless steel needles pierced into the body could be easily pulled out, but in the process of cultivation, the medicinal properties of some medicines that cultivators used to quickly increase their spiritual energy had long merged with their blood, unable to be separated from each other and difficult to pull out. The vital energy and energy sea in his body, after being moved, illuminated, and permeated by the star energy, became completely different. In his current perception, his true essence felt somewhat unfamiliar to him. Unfamiliarity was disadvantageous. Even if his vital energy did not decrease, but the vital energy flowing through his body was like a slow poison. This was truly the case of a broken lotus root being connected by silk, entangling endlessly. Even though Zheng Xiao was dead, her unique power, her vital energy, was still continuously corroding his body and will, including his confidence. He could not even remove Zheng Xiao's shadow from his mind. Too vicious. He became hysterical and angry for no reason. His face twisted, and he cursed in a low and shrill voice in the palace where there was no one else. He could not remember how many times this had happened. However, in the depths of his mind, there seemed to be a Zheng Xiao standing there vividly. She was laughing at him in disdain, mocking him. Those spirit lotus seeds originally belonged to her alone, and he was the one who wanted to consume them. Among Zheng Xiao's mocking voice, the clearest and most repeated sentence was, "Your cultivation, starting from today, will only fall and not rise." Is this lonely one really going to be like Wang Jingming in the past and lose at your hands? Yuan Wu's expression twisted to stupefaction. He finally pulled Zheng Xiao's shadow and voice away from his mind, and then gave 2 orders. Summoned by Qi back to Chongling. Order Zhao Gao to a Pang Palace. An old man heard Yuan Wu's voice in a Pang Palace. He was Shifu. He could not help but sigh softly. At this time, he suddenly thought that Yuan Wu had always been alone. He seemed to have no friends by his side. At this time, footsteps sounded outside his door. An official sent over a letter. To his shock, when he received this letter, he knew that this letter came from the Bazinkindo ground, from Ding Ning. He was familiar with the handwriting on the letter, exactly the same as Wang Jingming's in the past. However, the content itself made his body tremble slightly. The letter only asked, did he care about the life, death, and future of those hundreds of children? Chapter 886. Even cats and dogs raised from childhood would have some feelings, much less people. Those boys and girls had been picked out when they were infants and used the best spirit medicines to cleanse their marrow and bones. He had used up an unknown amount of resources from the Qin dynasty, but the spirit medicines and other cultivation items he had invested in these boys and girls could not compare to the effort he had put in. Every single one of these young boys and girls had received his meticulous guidance. This was his everything during the many years that he had been drifting overseas. How could he not care? But he did not believe that the past Wang Jingming, the present Ding Ning, would use the lives of these people to threaten him. If he did not agree to the Bazinkindo ground's conditions, would the Bazinkindo ground mercilessly kill these boys and girls? But the other did not even make any requests. Did Ding Ning want to talk to him face to face? He could not get an answer from this line of words. He took a deep breath and moved his gaze away from the letter. The moment he looked up, his mind was filled with an ominous feeling. Prepare the carriage. We are heading to Guangzhou. He ordered the attendants outside the door. When these attendants who had followed him overseas started to quickly arrange the carriage, the Chongling Imperial Palace started to panic. Li Mountain's Apang Palace was not far from Chongling, and they used fire beacons to communicate with Chongling. When Yuan Wu's order came from this palace, the fire beacon tower quickly lit up and sent Yuan Wu's order to the Chongling Imperial Palace with the secret words. All the doctors in the Chongling Imperial Palace had been waiting for a long time and had prepared enough medicine to treat injuries. But no one knew when Yuan Wu's order would come. Compared to their injuries, these doctors were more terrified of Yuan Wu's emotions. But when the order came, Zhao Gao, who was in charge of these doctors, was extremely calm. This was because his revenge had been completed. To him, Every day that he lived from now on would be the rest of his life. He boarded the carriage, closed the windows, and peacefully closed his eyes. He even took a nap until the carriage driver knocked on the door and reminded him that they had entered a paying palace. Inside the carriage, he used some cooling ointment to rub his head to wake himself up quickly. Many of the buildings in a paying palace gave off a fresh aura. However, as the palace attendant led the way, he noticed that there didn't seem to be any insects in this enormous palace area. Not only were there no insects, even the wind seemed to be quiet. The wind was flowing, but there was no sound of the wind. The deeper he went into a paying palace, the more he sensed an indescribable smell. However, he was no longer a cultivator, so he could not sense where this indescribable smell came from. You didn't bring your first aid kit. When they were 100 steps away from the door of Yuanwu's palace, a heavy and dignified voice sounded from within. The two officials leading the way subconsciously bowed and even held their breaths. You have to take a look at the patient's condition before you can use the medicine. It's useless to bring the medicine first. Zhao Gao also bowed and said, "Come in." The voice from the depths of the bedchamber sounded again. In the bedroom, Yuanwu was not lying down. He was sitting on the dragon throne in front of the bed, sitting very straight. He used a very cold and dignified gaze to look at Zhao Gao, who walked in. "Greetings, Holy One." Zhao Gao bowed again to Yuanwu and then said respectfully, "I need to be closer to Holy One, otherwise I cannot take a look at the condition." Yuanwu did not speak and only nodded slowly. Zhao Gao seemed to pass through the silent night and stood in front of Yuanwu. He carefully observed Yuanwu's complexion for a long time and even used his fingers to feel the pulse. However, he did not spend much time on the wound on Yuanwu's body. Then he bowed again and said softly, "For ordinary people, it is like rotten blood. For cultivators, it is a change in vital energy." Yuanwu's expression did not change and did not even respond. Zhao Gao said, "There are two ways to treat it." Yuanwu's eyes flashed with a strange light. "Two ways? There is one that I thought Holy One would not use," Zhao Gao said. Yuanwu looked at him. "Both ways. One is to disperse the cultivation. Since there is a problem with the vital energy, the only way is to completely disperse the vital energy and cultivate from the beginning. But to cultivate back to Holy One's present state, I do not know how many days it will take. So I thought Holy One would not use it." Zhao Gao looked at Yuanwu and said, "The other is to fight poison with poison." "This is new." Yuanwu smiled coldly. "This lonely one has never heard of fighting poison with poison in cultivation." Zhao Gao met his gaze and said neither humbly nor arrogantly, "Since the vital energy cannot adapt, then use medicine to completely change the vital energy, and at the same time, change the body so that the two can accept each other. This is possible. For example, if we use the methods of some powerful Yin gods and ghosts of the Qi dynasty to completely turn the body and vital energy into that kind of Yin energy body and Yin energy, at least we can guarantee that our cultivation will not fall." Yuanwu frowned deeply. After a moment of silence, he said, "If our cultivation does not fall but cannot advance, then we are trash." Zhao Gao said, "So there is only this method of fighting poison with poison?" Yuanwu looked into his eyes and said slowly, "You have a countermeasure? I made up my mind on the way here." Zhao Gao nodded. "But the Holy One is not an ordinary cultivator. I can only say that I have some confidence, but not absolute certainty." "You also know that this lonely one is not an ordinary person." Yuanwu could not help but laugh. There was a cruelty and coldness in his laughter that had never been there before. "If there is even the slightest accident, this lonely one will kill you first. When doctors cure poisons, they test the poison with their bodies, much less cure the Holy One." Zhao Gao also smiled, his expression gentle and calm. He said, "As long as the Holy One dares to bet, I will bet my life." Yuanwu lowered his head slightly, as though he was considering a complicated problem. Many breaths later, he looked up and said, "You are not a cultivator." Zhao Gao nodded. Yuanwu took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. "Very good." Zhao Gao's eyebrows moved slightly, but he did not respond. He did not understand what Yuan Wu meant by this. Do you not feel that this is a very deformed world? Yuan Wu's voice sounded again, cold and with a hint of violence, echoing in this deathly silent palace. Zhao Gao bowed his head. I am just a doctor. I do not know what the Holy One means. The deformed world comes from cultivators. Yuan Wu was no longer sitting straight. He leaned against the back of the chair. Cultivators are the biggest cancer in this world, something that should not exist. I still do not understand the Holy One's meaning. Zhao Gao still had his head bowed and said, Holy One, you are also a cultivator. Chapter 887. When the power of cultivators was not as great as it is now, any dynasty would be governed by virtue. But when the power of cultivators reached a certain level, when the dynasties that spoke of virtue were unrivaled were easily wiped out by cultivators and become a joke in the history books, virtue would also become a joke. Yuan Wu slowly looked up. He looked at Zhao Gao like he was looking at air. Attacking a city, defending a country, all of this requires the power of cultivators. But when a cultivator can easily massacre a city and kill a powerful army, in order to deal with this kind of cultivator, the army must raise cultivators. Cultivators are the top existences in the world. Everything in the dynasty, and even the entire era, is gathered on them. In the end, they're the most unstable factor for the entire dynasty and the world. For example, those great rebels, one person is enough to create chaos. It's such a deformed world, right? Zhao Gao could not answer Yuan Wu's question. Yuan Wu's words were chaotic in his view. Clearly, Yuan Wu did not want to discuss anything with him, but just needed him to be a pure listener. At least from Yuan Wu's words and actions, he was sure that Yuan Wu's mind was in chaos right now because he was not a cultivator. Zheng Xiu's death and the problem of his cultivation caused his emotions to be problematic. For Zhao Gao, this was a joyous matter and an opportunity. So Zhao Gao lowered his head, appearing humble and terrified. But in reality, he did not want Yuan Wu to see the strange look in his eyes. The Bazinkindo ground feels that the Qin dynasty has unified the world and eliminated the wars between the dynasties. But in this lonely one's view, the greatest problem is the Bazinkindo ground, and the overly powerful cultivators of the Bazinkindo ground are the problem. Yuan Wu did not care about his reaction and continued to speak. No one can guarantee everyone's thoughts. Even in the legends, there are powerful existences who can destroy the world because of a moment of interest. So this lonely one sees further than them and thinks further. They want to unify the world, but this lonely one wants to eliminate all cultivation places and have all cultivators disappear. Is it wrong for me to destroy these people in the Bazinkindo ground? Everyone had their own reasons for existing. How could one or two people clearly determine who was right or wrong? Zhao Gao sneered in his heart, but there was still no change on his face. But then, he heard a sigh. A long sigh sounded in this deathly silent hall, like the sound of waves washing over a sandy beach. Zhao Gao's heart skipped a beat. Because you are not a cultivator, this lonely one will say these things to you. But today, you can forget everything this lonely one says to you. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Yuan Wu's voice sounded again. You can prepare medicine for this lonely one's treatment. He wants you to cure him. Not long after Zhao Gao's carriage left a paying palace, the coachman asked Zhao Gao who was inside the carriage. The coachman was Xin Xian. If this was in the past Chongling, it was impossible for a person like him to appear so openly as a carriage driver without being discovered, even if he was in a meticulous disguise. But after Yi Xiling, Chief Inspector Chen, and Xin Xian left Chongling, everything seemed so easy. Zhao Gao nodded. What medicine do you want to use? Xin Xian asked. Zhao Gao shook his head. This is a problem Qin Yaoyin and Geng Run need to consider. In terms of using medicine and poison, no one in the world is more skilled than them. In terms of using medicine and poison, no one is better than these two people of Min Mountain Sword sect. Xin Xian also shook his head. But in terms of slowly torturing people and making them lose their reason. No one is better than me. The main medicine will be provided by them. I know that there is a supplementary medicine that is extremely effective, but if one stops taking it, it is like 10,000 ants eating away at the bone. It is unbearable. Very good, Zhao Gao responded. Inside the carriage, he could not help but turn to look at the newly built imperial palace through the cracks in the curtains. This Apang palace was vast. There would be powerful formations set up inside and wondrous energy laws. But at this time, it was just an exquisite prison cell. Who would have thought that after Yuan Wu had endured for so many years, he would become a prisoner in a prison cell? A carriage that had been speeding towards Guanzhong stopped. The owner of the carriage was Fu. He had hurried to Guanzhong because of the letter Ding Ning had given him. The virgin boys and girls he cared about were in Guanzhong. Yet he had just arrived in Tong City, and before he had truly entered Guanzhong, he received news that he was about to meet with the virgin boys and girls under his command. There was a military order that had been sent out before he had departed for these virgin boys and girls to leave Guanzhong and head towards Tong City. These virgin boys and girls were one of the most important forces of the Qin dynasty at this time, but they were only under his command and only accepted his military orders. He had not sent that military order, so someone had forged his military order, successfully passed it on, and caused all the military orders he had sent later to disappear. When the carriage that Su Fu was in stopped, it was noon, and the light in the sky was extremely bright and beautiful. But inexplicably, Tong City in Su Fu's sight was dark. Not just Tong City, but all of the present Qin dynasty was shrouded in dusk. Su Fu took a deep breath. He started to understand that Ding Ning wanted him to see some things, or to completely give up. From the barracks outside Tong Pass came the sound of chattering and joyous laughter. He was very familiar with this sound. Those virgin boys and girls he was familiar with had been brought to this camp. They should have sensed his arrival and were cheering. At this time, a metallic sound sounded. The sound of enormous things moving sounded in the sky. Large patches of black clouds covered the military camp. Fu's pupils contracted slightly. A cultivator in indigo robes had appeared on the path in front of him. This was the fastest swordsman in the world, Yantai Guanjian of Min Mountain Sword Sect. Yantai Guanjian nodded to him in greeting and said, "It is best if you just watch." These words were not polite, but to an enemy, they were very polite. Shifu was silent for a moment. He stood up in the carriage, walked out, and slowly said, "Whether I watch or act depends on what he wants to do." The noise in the military camp suddenly disappeared, because a black-robed youth had appeared on the flat field in front of the military camp. Chapter 888. Black was the most common color of the Qin people. Black clothing, black armor, and even the standard swords used by the army were all black. But this black-robed youth's black was different. It was exceptionally deep and gave off an unimaginable death energy. Even for Su Fu, the appearance of this black-robed youth was very sudden. He seemed to have suddenly appeared in everyone's sight, and then the black death energy on his body flowed down the corners of his clothing and flowed out along the ground. Not just Su Fu, all the cultivators in the camp knew who this black-robed youth was. In the world, of all the cultivators who cultivated the Yin and Ghost, only Yin Ying's disciple was so young and so powerful. But even Su Fu did not understand why this black-robed youth appeared like this. "Do you think he can deal with the sword formation alone?" He frowned deeply and asked Yantai Guanjian, using a cultivator of similar age to deal with the sword formation. "Is this what you want me to see?" Yantai Guanjian looked calmly at him and asked in return, "Why not?" Su Fu was slightly angry. Many of Chongling's old people were very cultured. He and Mo Shoqing were the same. He did not understand why he was angry, but he was inexplicably angry. "But because my sword formation is made up of children, the Bazin Kendo ground cannot deal with it, nor can they not deal with it." He could not help but sneer. If the Bazin Kendo ground kills these children, it will not be good to hear that they killed so many children. If they do not kill them, this sword formation is powerful and invincible in battle. It is enough to be the key to victory. But Ding Ning and Lin Zhujiu think that if they use a cultivator of similar age to deal with this sword formation, there will be no such problem. Just one cultivator is enough to deal with my sword formation. Yintai Guanjian could understand this old man's emotions. This sword formation had not just used up this old man's precious decades of time, but also used up the precious cultivation resources of the Qin dynasty. These 10-year-old children were originally cultivation geniuses, selected from all over the world. No matter how talented Yin Ying's disciples were, how much wealth Yin left behind, and how much they were taught by Ding Ning and the others, how could they compare to the gifts of the entire dynasty? Moreover, he was alone. I understand why you're angry. A cultivator of Yintai Guanjin's level did not need to disguise his emotions. He looked at Su Fu and calmly shook his head. But the matter is not as simple as you think. Also, what you say is what you think. Since Ding Ning asked you to come, he must have his reasons. Su Fu took a deep breath. He also realized that he shouldn't lose his composure in front of his juniors. He shook his head and didn't want to say anything, so he just watched. Tong City, which was not far away, was also alarmed by the dark clouds brought about by the arrival of the Teng Jiao. There was a lot of smoke and dust in the city, and it seemed that some troops were quickly gathering. However, the surroundings of the military camp became increasingly quiet. As the black energy flowed around the black-robed youth, Qin Mu, on the drill ground, even the soft sounds of insects disappeared. But inexplicably, as the world grew quieter, so quiet that even the sound of falling leaves could be heard, the sound of a zither came from somewhere. This zither sound was very low, almost imperceptible, as though it would disappear at any moment, and did not carry any energy vibrations. But when he heard the zither sound, Su Fu's expression suddenly changed. Sand and dust suddenly rose on the drill ground. The grains of sand did not scatter, but floated straight into the air. Previously, the black energy flowing off Qin Mu's body was like heavy water, flowing on the ground. But at this time, threads of black energy seeped out of the hard earth and flew straight into the air. The ground started to shake. The entire camp started to shake. The war horses in the camp started to panic, and there were shouts to restrain them. It was also at this moment that the air above the camp was sliced into countless pieces by a dazzling sword light, and then turned into countless chaotic streams of wind. The boys and girls in the camp sensed Qin Mu's hostility, and sensed that Qin Mu had attacked. The ground of the drill ground split apart piece by piece, and then was pushed apart by more black energy and flipped upwards. The flying swords flying above the camp quickly reacted to the energy of the ghosts. The flying swords brought out flashing sword paths, and they were actually continuously gathering sunlight. The camp grew brighter, so bright it was blinding, so bright it was just a bright ball, and the flying swords could not be seen inside. The burning sunlight was the bane of the ghosts' energies, but Qin Mu did not seem to be affected. The black chi on his arms became thicker and thicker. His palms could no longer be seen. 2 streams of black chi went deep into the ground. As his arms moved slightly, the ground instantly boiled. Pieces of hard soil that weighed more than 1,000 kilograms flew up like feathers. In a flash, a black mountain rose from the ground. There were countless gravestones on the black mountain, like a forest. This was the 1,000-grave mountain, Yin Ying's life bond item, and Qin Mu's life bond item in this life. When the faint zither sound that had nothing to do with this battle sounded, Su Fu's expression changed dramatically. When the 1,000-grave mountain rose up, Su Fu's pupils contracted. The 1,000-grave mountain was not unfamiliar and mysterious to the world of cultivators. But the 1,000-grave mountain at this time was very different from the 1,000-grave mountain of the past. The moment the black robe rose into the air, the black mountain rocks and soil beneath the tombstones loosened. The gravestones floated up like the dirt on the drill ground. Below the tombstone, figures appeared one after another. These figures were all dead objects. They all had that unique smell of decay and filth. To cultivators, It was like the mold on rotten food that they were most unwilling to come into contact with. However, what made one's heart palpitate was that the yuan qi fluctuations in these dead bodies were very powerful and terrifying. Qianmu's figure disappeared into the Black Mountain. Many cultivators, who gave off the smell of decay, left the Black Mountain and walked towards the camp ahead. Uncontrollable cries of surprise rang out from the barracks. These voices were very young. The young cultivators who made up the camp had never encountered an enemy like this. The energy of these cultivators surged out, and the sound of mountains moving sounded in the sky. What followed was a storm created by the falling of primal energies of the universe. Su Fu's face was pale. These cultivators were clearly dead things that had been made into puppets, but they clearly had Realm 7 power. Chapter 889. Su Fu's sword formation was an anomaly to the entire Xiuzhi world, and an unprecedented beginning. In the history of the Xiuzhi world, there had never been a sword formation with such a large number of people. Large numbers meant complexity, and the amount of primal energies of the universe they could attract would increase. Also, while each swordsman in this sword formation was young, they had reached the level where they could control flying swords. The rapid flying sword could create countless vortexes in the air with every breath, causing countless surges of yuan qi to surge. When these forces could condense into one, it was undoubtedly terrifying to the extreme. But Qianmu's Black Mountain was an unprecedented anomaly to the Xiuzhi world. Su Fu's sword formation could be said to be the most important thing the Qin dynasty army relied on right now, even more important than the Netherfloat fleet itself. It could deal with many Realm 7 grandmasters at the same time and easily kill them. But what about dozens, or even close to 100, Realm 7 grandmasters who were lifeless, who did not know pain or fear, and who completely obeyed the will of one person? In the past, no one knew the result. But now, everyone would quickly see the result. The power of the whirlpools of sword energy gathered on the dozens of sword lights. These sword lights were as bright as stars in the day, and easily tore apart the thick yin energy around these cultivators, turning the gray-black energy into weak streams of flame, and then collided with the weapons in the hands of these cultivators, or the energy they had gathered. In a flash, the sound of countless mountains colliding sounded. The solid wooden wall outside the barracks was easily shattered into countless wood shavings. The flying swords flying out of the sword formation clearly had the advantage. Several corpse cultivators were directly pierced through, and then violently torn to pieces by the surging sword lights. Other than these corpse cultivators that were torn to pieces, when the flying swords were retracted, at least half of the corpse cultivators that charged out of the Black Mountain Bell had wounds of various sizes. Some of them had terrifying sword holes on their bodies, some of them were missing limbs, and some of them even had half of their faces cut off. But even so, the masters of the flying swords in the camp trembled in fear, and some even started to cry. The vital energy of these heavily injured corpse cultivators was also dissipating. Inky black energy seeped out of the wounds like blood, but they still moved forward. The flying swords that had just flown through their bodies quickly dimmed. When the sword boys controlling these flying swords poured their vital energy into the seal scripts of these flying swords, the unusual vibrations even affected their energy seas. The vital chi of Yin spirits and ghosts already had the terrifying ability to corrupt flying swords and destroy runes, let alone the vital chi of the Thousand Tombs Mountain. When a flying sword was like an eagle with injured wings, how could it be able to perfectly draw out the sword Dao? Su Fu's face was exceptionally pale. He really wanted to remind his disciples that the only way to turn defeat into victory was to gather all their strength and kill the black-robed young man who was controlling the Thousand Tombs Mountain. However, even if he spoke, it would be too late. A stern shout came from the depths of the Black Mountain. With this shout, the Black Mountain expanded violently, giving people the feeling that it was about to explode. Boom! The corpse cultivators, who were heavily injured and had their vitality leaking out, directly self-destructed from the depths of their bodies. Balls of terrifying black yuan qi wreaked havoc in the air with unimaginable violent power. Behind the violent black yuan qi, there was a series of heart-palpitating crashing sounds. The remaining corpse cultivators were like hungry ghosts that had eaten fresh food. Their power rose again, and then they poured out all the power in their bodies. An unimaginable scene appeared in front of the camp. The yuan qi produced by the explosion did not completely disperse. Instead, it was twisted into waves by the force behind it. It was as if huge demonic palms were formed in the air. In an instant, they traversed a distance of several thousand feet and smashed into the sword formation. Before the Een spirits and ghosts smashed down, more tender cries sounded from the sword formation. Hundreds of flying swords crazily shuttled through the air, forming a sword net. The black energy that was like an enormous demonic arm pressed down like a mountain. These flying swords fell slightly, but the sword lights managed to hold on. There were continuous explosions in the air, giving people the feeling that city walls were collapsing and the earth was shaking. But the sword lights on these flying swords were dimming, and the trembling of the flying swords inside the sword lights gradually grew stronger. Su Fu's face turned from white to gray. He was the cultivator most familiar with this sword formation, so he knew victory was decided. If the cultivation of these sword boys was stronger, the vital energy on the flying swords more stable, and the primal energies of the universe more powerful, they may be able to exhaust the energies of the Black Mountain and the corpse cultivators. But now, these sword boys could not. When a hole appeared in the sword formation, it would bring death and injury. The greatest difference between a sword formation and an individual cultivator was that such an enormous sword formation, if one person died, could not form the formation. Right now, this sword formation was in the process of slow death. When the ghostly energies reached the point where one of the flying swords could not be controlled, the battle would end. At this time, Su Fu finally understood the meaning of Ding Ning having him come to watch this battle. Because he possessed this sword formation, he was naturally very proud. Before something like this happened in front of him, he would not agree to any of Ding Ning's conditions. The zither whimpered. As this sword formation slowly died, Su Fu did not know what to feel or how to speak. On the other side of the camp, a patch of black bamboo formed out of thin air. A red-robed woman walked out of the black energy, holding a zither. When she was 50 steps away from him, she bowed to him from a distance and gave her thanks. Official Su, thank you for your care these years. This girl knows that without Elder Su's care, I would not be safe in Chongling's fish market. The red-robed woman was naturally the eldest miss of the Shang family. After she gave her thanks, she asked softly, "But Elder Su, have you ever thought, is this worthy of the Shang families?" The appearance of the eldest miss of the Shang family caused countless past events to come. Su Fu's mind was completely blank. After this question, his body froze, and he could not even breathe. Is there really no need to care about right and wrong, and no one is worthy of another? The eldest miss of the Shang family still spoke in a serene tone. You are my father's good friend, and one of my father's most trusted people. Even though you did not know when Chongling made the Shang family the scapegoat, after so many years, you are still loyal to the people who destroyed the Shang family. In order to achieve your goal, you do not even need any personal emotions. Then what you want to do in the future, I presume, is not important. Yuan Wu will lose. You should wake up, take these sword boys, and leave Chongling. If you still cannot leave the empire, I will give you an ocean, and you can build one yourself. At this time, Yintai Guanjin said to him, and then explained softly, this is what Ding Ning said to you. Yuan Wu will lose. You should wake up, take these sword boys, and leave Chongling. If you still cannot leave the empire, I will give you an ocean, and you can build one yourself. At this time, Yintai Guanjin said to him, and then explained softly, this is what Ding Ning said to you. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.